Noah, the first story. Biblical deluge stories are not original. The Hebrew authors of the Bible are credited for discovering and deciphering the 11th tablet of the Sumerian Epic of Gilgamesh by the British Museum's George Smith. The Babylonian deluge myth originates from Sumerian mythology. Arno Pobel published a fragment comprising the lower third of a 6-column Sumerian tablet in the Nippur collection of the University Museum in 1914. Its contents are primarily devoted to the story of the flood. Although scholars have been looking for additional deluge tablets, no further fragment has been found in any museum, private collection or excavation. Even though Pobel is our sole source, the translation he prepared is still rudimentary and standard. A lone tablet containing the contents of a flood episode is notable, not just because of that episode, but also because it is primarily about flooding. The same holds for the passages preceding and introducing the deluge's story. These passages impact Sumerian cosmology. These texts contain several telling statements concerning the creation of man, the origin of kingship, and the existence of at least 5 prehistoric cities. The following is practically the entire extant text of the myth, with its tantalizing obscurities and uncertainties. Cuneiformists face many challenges and are in for several surprises in the future. No date can be given for the appearance of myths. There is a break of about 37 lines in the lower third of the preserved tablet. A deity then addresses other deities. He is probably declaring that he will save humanity from extinction, and that, as a result, man will construct the cities and temples of the gods. The address is followed by 3 lines that describe the deity's actions to make his words effective, but are hard to relate to the context. 4 more lines follow, beginning with the creation of man, animals, and plants. Overall, it reads like this. I will destroy my humankind in its destruction. I will return their tenentu by my creatures. I will return the people to their homes. They will build the divine laws, and I will comfort them with my shade. Their bricks will be laid in pure places for our houses. Places of purity will be the places of our decisions. There was a pure fire quenching the water. Rituals were perfected, and divine laws were exalted. He accomplished this on earth. He put the law in place. Then the earth sprouted lush vegetation after Enlil, Enki, and Ninhursag fashioned the black-headed people. Creatures with 4 legs of the plain were created creatively. Approximately 37 lines later, we learn that the kingship was lowered from heaven and 5 cities were established. Following the throne of kingship were lowered from heaven, after the exalted tiara and throne of kingship were lowered from heaven. By perfecting the rites and the exalted divine laws, establishing 5 pure cities, they were referred to as cult centers and given names. He gave Eridu, the first of these cities, to Nudimmud, the leader, and Bad-Tabira, the second. He gave the third, Larak, to Enderbilisag. Flood, Ark, and Sumerian Noah. The only document of this myth is Arno Pobel's handwritten copy of the flood tablet in the University Museum. The 4th, Sipar, gave the hero Utu. The 5th, Sharupak, he gave to Sud. Once he named these cities, he assigned them as cult centers. Then he established the Cleaning of Small Rivers program. After a break of about 37 lines, the gods decide to bring the flood and destroy humankind. Some gods are unhappy over the cruel decision when the text becomes understandable again. The counterpart to Noah in the Bible is Ziu-Sudra. He is a pious, God-fearing king who constantly seeks divine revelations through dreams and incantations. Ziu-Sudra appears to station himself by a wall, where he hears the voice of a deity communicating the decision taken by the gods to send a flood and to destroy the seed of humanity. The most extensive part of this passage reads, During the flood, Nintu wept like a baby. Pure Inanna penned a lament for its people. Enki consulted with himself. Enlil, Enki, and Ninhursag. Heaven and earth uttered the names of An and Enlil. Then Ziu-Sudra, king of Pashishu, did giant-sized construction. He acted with humility, obedience, and reverence. Constantly attending, he brought forth all kinds of dreams. He uttered the names of heaven and earth. The gods built a wall. Standing by its side, Ziu-Sudra listened. Stand by my left wall. Take my word and listen to my instructions by the wall. Because of our efforts, a flood will sweep over the cult centers to destroy the seed of humanity. This is the decision, the word of the gods. Enlil and An obeyed the command. its kingship and rule will end. Ziusudra must have received detailed instructions in the text about building a giant boat to save himself from destruction. Sadly, this is missing because of another 40-line break. Upon rereading the text, we find the flood had already raged in all its violence over the land for 7 days and nights. As the sun god Utu returns, bringing his precious light everywhere, Ziusudra prostrates himself before him and offers sacrifices. Read the lines below. Violent windstorms and floods swept over the cult centers. After the flood had swept the land for 7 days and 7 nights, storms on the mighty waters had tossed the boat about. He shed light on heaven and earth. Ziusudra opened a window to the vast boat. As a gift, Atu brought his rays into the giant boat. King Ziusudra protested before Utu. The king slaughters a sheep and an ox. Again, there is a break of about 39 lines here. The last lines of our text describe Ziusudra's deification. He was given eternal life when he prostrated himself to An and Enlil and was transferred to Dilmun, the city where the sun rises. Anu and Enlil uttered breath of heaven, and breath of heaven, the breath stretched. From the earth, vegetation rises. The king Ziusudra. He protested before An and Enlil. Ziusudra was cherished by An and Enlil. It gives him a lifelike appearance. The god they bring down for him will breathe forever. Afterward, Ziusudra the king, the keeper of the names of vegetation and the seeds of humankind. They caused to dwell in the land of crossing, the land of Dilmun, the place where the sun rises. We do not understand what happened to the transfigured Ziusudra in the home of the immortals, since the rest of the tablet, containing about 39 lines of text, is destroyed. We now turn to Hades, from paradise to the mighty below, or as the Sumerians referred to it, the land of no return. This descent to the netherworld is one of the best preserved Sumerian myths. A restless goddess descends to the land of the dead to satisfy her unbridled ambitions. This provides a rare parallel with one of the most significant New Testament themes. In recent years, many historical and scriptural findings have been revealed that were not included or misrepresented in the canonical Bible. When historical texts like the Book of Enoch, Nag Hammadi Gospels, and the Book of Jubilees are synthesized and correlated with existing documents, they provide a profound understanding of the beliefs shared in modern Western culture. Our knowledge of Middle Eastern history is enriched by ancient writings not part of the canonical Bible. This has had a powerful effect on Western thought. In the deserted plains of Mesopotamia lie hidden scrolls hidden in remote caves, cuneiform tablets covered by the sands of time, and monuments aligned perfectly to the solstice and equinox. Documents from this period predate the canonical Bible for thousands of years. The story's origins and influences are exposed here. It is surprising to learn that Noah lived in Shuruppak, the Sumerian capital of the city of Noah. He was reasonably well educated in his account of the period he lived. The king of Uruk visits Noah in the Epic of Gilgamesh, one of the longest known stories involving the king of Uruk. During the conversation, he discusses some matters that concern both of them. Sumer is a land between two rivers, the Tigris and Euphrates, at the southern end of Mesopotamia. Abraham was born there. Once the covenant was made between Abram and the Lord, he became Abraham. He had been called Abram before that. The Lord told Abram in Genesis chapter 12, verses 1 to 4, "The time is near for you to become the father of many nations." Genesis. Follow me to the Anunnaki land. Leave your Anunnaki country, your people, and your father's household. I will show you. You will become a prosperous nation, and I will bless you. Your name will become famous, and you will be blessed. Those who help you will be blessed, and those who curse you will be cursed, and all Anunnaki on earth will be blessed through you. When the Lord called Abram to go to the land of Canaan, he was in the Sumerian city of Haran. Abram was born approximately 1433 BCE in the Sumerian city of Ur. Terah, his father, was an artisan and a priest in the local temple. His brothers Nahor and Haran also lived there. Abraham is preparing to leave for Canaan when he is in the city of Haran. The Lord brought you out of Ur of the Chaldeans to give you this land. Isn't the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob also the God of the Israelites, the God of the Old Testament? Abraham's God also had another name in Sumer besides Jehovah, Yahweh, and El Shaddai, which he used in one of his temples in the city of Ur. Another notable document from Abraham's region and era the Atrahasis, mentions Abraham's deity by name. This Sumerian deity also worshipped brother and sister gods in Mesopotamia and the surrounding regions, according to the cuneiform Anunnaki tablets found in Ur and many other pre- and post-diluvial cities along the Tigris and Euphrates, including Sippar and Nineveh. As well as Abraham and Noah, these deities had a close relationship with them. Can we identify them? Considering Abraham's god's history as a Sumerian deity with a temple dedicated to him in Ur of the Chaldeans, what should we make of it? Early church authorities, particularly the Roman Catholic Church, controlled and channeled funding for early archaeological studies. In 325 AD, the same institution issued a mandate to only fund archaeological explorations consistent with the story told in the canonical Bible. As curiosity grew, secret books and artifacts, codices, cylinder seals, Sumerian tablets, and monuments inscribed with cuneiform gave up their secrets to disenfranchised seekers. Darius I commissioned the historical marker commemorating the Persian ruler's suppression of rival uprising between 522 and 486 BCE. Sir Henry Rawlinson, a British armed forces officer training the army of the Shah of Iran, began studying the inscription in 1835. Sir Henry Rawlinson, who recorded and decoded 3 distinct languages he discovered in 1835, chiselled into the cliffs of Behistun, modern-day Iran. As Behistan's name was anglicised as Behistun, the monument became known as the Behistun inscription. Rawlinson could copy the Old Persian inscription, despite its inaccessibility by climbing the cliff. Elamites were across a chasm, and Babylonians were 4 meters above. Both were out of our reach, and we are left with later. After obtaining a third of the syllabary, Rawlinson began deciphering the Persian text through Grotefend's work. Herodotus's list of Persian kings appeared in the first section of this text. Rawlinson cracked the form of cuneiform used for Old Persian by 1838 by matching names with characters. He presented his results to the Royal Asiatic Society in London and Paris. Following decoding the tablets, Major Rawlinson copied the strange wedge-shaped writings etched into the sheer rock face for the British Museum. The ability to translate Old Persian, Anunnaki Elamite, and Akkadian scripts from one to another led to the rediscovery of Mesopotamian sites in modern-day Iraq, buried beneath the desert sands. Examining the first-hand writings and evidence left by the Egyptians, Sumerians, and early church authors sheds new light on the historical truth, which seems stranger than the most improbable fictional tales. Many secrets have been revealed by discoveries in ancient cities across Mesopotamia, from Nineveh to Eridu in the south. Our society's civilization foundations rest on the Genesis accounts that historians and scribes of the past compiled from the actual evidence. The dedication, sweat, and blood of the pioneer investigators from the past have unearthed various clues, which have been laid down for all to see. When recorded, history's texts are linked by those in power, often placing truth on the sidelines. The intention is to perpetuate the controlling influences of the ruling party through a story. Flagrant acts were further obscure by chipping away carved hieroglyphs to subsume the names and ranks of rival deities and creating lists, which are also known as lists of names. For thousands of years, first-hand authors have deprived humanity of truth-telling books, such as Enoch's book. The truth was left to those appointed because historical accuracy was unreliable. Throughout history, most people did not read, so this happened readily. Throughout history, scribes and priests were often trained in the lingual arts, so they had their fingers on the pulse of truth. Archaeologists recently discovered and decoded tens of thousands of cuneiform tablets buried for thousands of years beneath the silt and sand of the Anunnaki Mesopotamian plains, buried for thousands of years guarding recorded secrets. Because of discovering tens of thousands of clay tablets written in cuneiform, a cuneiform digitization project was launched to extract the tablet secrets. Several prominent museums in London, Paris, and Berlin display Sumerian artifacts and cuneiform tablets. Marriage and trade are documented in Sumerian records found in ancient cities like Uruk, the biblical Erech. As well as Anunnaki records of births and deaths, they provide more critical accounts of decrees. Sometimes Sumerian records predate the canonical Bible by thousands of years. The differences between the first-hand historical records and those composed by societal victors allow one to compare the current basis for cultural and social mores with their antecedent counterparts from different cultures toward a synthesis of those perspectives. As described in specific detail in the Book of Enoch, Noah's mystifying birth was stranger than fiction. According to some sources, Noah's father was not Lamech, as described in Genesis chapter 5, verse 28, but one of the Mesopotamian deities who saved him from the deluge. The Bible tells the same story, illuminating no Sumerian details. Ziusudra, aka Noah, lives in a reed hut in the old Babylonian flood story where the deity speaks to him. The Mesopotamian plains are warned of a flood by this deity. An exciting epiphany is revealed by analyzing birth records, genealogy tables, and deities venerated in Mesopotamian temples. Our present-day knowledge base reveals a cultural lie that has such a profound impact that everything we previously believed is relegated to obscurity, as if it were a conclusion we would not have reached. When Westerners are asked, "Who is Yahweh?" they do not know the answer. It usually includes Jehovah at the end, followed by God's statement as taught explicitly in the Old Testament and canonical Bible. The truth is revealed when one realizes Yahweh was none other than the local Anunnaki deity of the Sumerian citadel of Ur, Enlil. For Enlil was mentioned in many Sumerian and other historical accounts. In various Anunnaki temples, from Nineveh to Assur to the Sumerian city of Ur, Enlil and his relatives were revered as gods. His brother Enki and Nanna and Inanna also built temples at prominent cultural and trade centers within the region. Unlike the Anunnaki, Enlil was not acting alone. He acted with others known as the Nephilim or Elohim in Genesis chapter 1 verse 26, where this confusing statement is made. Genesis: "Let us make a dapper in our image, in our likeness," says God. Noah, or Atrahasis, is a mythical creation story that links the same Anunnaki deities venerated in the temples of the Near East with Enlil Yahweh of the Old Testament and his brother Enki Adonai, the hidden us, in Genesis chapter 1, verse 26. Enki and his half-sister Ninmah produce Homo sapiens, a primitive worker in a genetic experiment. Reading texts that predate the Genesis account over 1,700 years, such as the Atrahasis, clarifies the confusion caused by the plural statement us, our, in the biblical creation account. Extensive details are given regarding the results of clinical trials involving the archetype of the human species. Enlil's half-sister, Ninhursag, or Ninmah, and his arch-rival and more scientifically inclined brother, Enki, conducted the trial in an African laboratory. Researchers recognize the level of knowledge required to discuss a topic such as genetic engineering in a document nearly 5,000 years old, which contains a much more detailed account of man's creation, one that makes much more sense in terms of technical and historical aspects, as opposed to the accurate description in the Bible, which is often complementary. Additionally, similar documents shed light on King Upnapishtim of Shuruppak, the biblical Noah, 600 years old when the world was flooded. Different names also identified many deities which appeared to span long periods. Akkadians named the excellent god Sin, after whom the Sinai Peninsula was named Nanna, the moon god, son of Enlil, after various Sumerian cities, including Ur and Haran. Inanna, his sister, wore a crescent moon symbol and had symbols throughout Mesopotamia. She was known to the Akkadians as Ishtar. Herodotus was a Greek historian from Ionia who lived in the 5th century BCE. It is still used today by Egyptologists to classify Egyptian civilization into dynasties. Egyptian priest historian Manetho seems to have agreed with Herodotus's division of Egypt's rulership into 3 dynasties, except that he included an additional era ruled by the gods alone instead of 3. According to Manetho, the first dynasty of Egyptian gods ruled for 12,300 years. Once again, we find astonishingly long reigns of the first Egyptian dynasty rulers. The Sumerian texts reveal Anu assigned the regions of Egypt and Africa to Enki, a high-ranking deity from Eridu, by 3860 BCE. It just so happens that the Jewish astrological calendar, whose Anunnaki origins are in the Sumerian city of Nippur, began counting in 3760 BCE. Perhaps you would think it is coincidental, but it is not, according to ancient cuneiform texts. According to Manetho, the second Egyptian dynastic period was ruled by 12 divine rulers for 1,570 years. Thoth, also a son of Enki, was the first god of the second dynasty. Egypt was ruled for 3,650 years by 30 demigods. Scholars believe the Pharaonic dynasty began around 3100 BC and lasted 350 years. It had its capital in Memphis, or Men-Nefer in Greek. Where did these deities come from? The Sumerian kings list further complicates clues to the mystery. According to the records, some of the first kings of Sumer ruled for up to 28,800 years. That is almost unimaginable. The deities worshipped in Mesopotamian temples taught all aspects of civilization to the Sumerians by the deities worshipped in Mesopotamian temples. Besides creating the zodiac, Sumerian deities knew the Earth's equinox orbital plane, tilt axis, and spherical shape. During the Middle Ages, Europe possessed less detailed knowledge than Sumer did. Despite this, Sumer and his surrounding region produced many of the first inventions and advanced achievements of civilizations, including mathematics, meteorology, and law codes. Various traditions describe sin, including those associated with Assyria, and the crescent moon symbol found on flags and mosques associated with Islam. The Sumerian goddess Inanna was also known as Hathor in Egypt, and her name is well known and memorialized in many temples, including the Temple of Hathor, found in the wilderness of the deity Nannar-Sin. Mesopotamian people recognized Nannar-Sin as the moon god, and the Egyptian people had Inanna, also known as Hathor. The authors readily inscribed in baked clay the genealogy accounts of Nannar-Sin as the son of Enlil in the Sumerian records, and he was known as the moon god to the people of the ancient Middle East. History shows that Nannar-Sin had a large following in his cult centers, spread throughout southern Iraq to Syria, Turkey, and Iran. What is the meaning of Nannar-Sin? Nannar-Sin might be the deity that Muhammad encountered in the wilderness, a sacred center for the religion of Islam. The Kaaba stone in Mecca, Saudi Arabia, was initially dedicated to the moon god called Allah there. The mere act of replacing one proper noun results in replacing another, especially with a deity's name. A new epithet replaces the old one. Comparisons between the Sumerian storm god Enlil in Lamentations of and the god of vengeance in the Old Testament prove this. Being witnesses to the Sumerian deity Enlil, whose origins were mysterious, but whose daily existence had been recorded and witnessed by the biblical patriarch Abraham and people of the city of become the Anunnaki city one of the mountain El Shaddai. In the end, Jehovah became a fantastic discovery to the people of Israel that connected the gods of Sumeria with at least one of the gods of the Old Testament. Better-known gods were worshipped elsewhere in the region, like Enki, Aka Aharu Mazda, as he was known as the god of light and wisdom. Allah replaced Ahura Mazda, aka Nannar-Sin, when Arab conquerors overthrew the Persians in 633 BCE, headquartered at their spectacular capital at Persepolis. In 644 BCE, the Arabs invaded and caused the Zoroastrian faith to decline. Egyptian and Sumerian cultures frequently subsumed names and epithets to solidify power and authority. Several names were merged into a single name, tailor-made to fit the worshipping subject's culture and language. The purpose was probably to facilitate referring to rivals and aggregating data during convenient times. Considering that what one culture terms a deity, another culture terms another name, the idea of an Anunnaki myth takes on more significance, especially if the name is traceable across cultures. Likewise, the authority of political and religious beliefs in a society is determined by the ruling forces that select the purveyor of truth in history. According to the ruling party or superpower, religious truth originates from subordinated cultures, classified as pagan or occult. The winner's beliefs and what others believe is politely referred to as myths rather than as the politically incorrect label of the lie. The armies of Earth's generals have gathered once again in the Middle East, be it truth or fiction, dogma or doctrine. In the Anunnaki Gods trilogy by Zecharia Sitchin, Enlil and Enki and their offspring are described as having battled. Could this explain the current conflicts involving Iran, Iraq, Syria and Israel? Will Enki's offspring disturb the destructive plan of his arch-rival Enlil, Zeus to the Greeks, and his warmonger son, Ninurta, Apollo to the Greeks? Jesus is rejected as the Messiah because he was the offspring of Enki, Jehovah's rival. This is the term An. Sumerologists interpret Una, Ki, means heaven to earth. The critical point is the connection between the term heaven and the planet of Anunnaki origin. Sitchin wrote about Nibiru in 1976 as detailed in The 12th Planet. Additionally, according to Mesopotamian literature such as the Epic of Gilgamesh, Anu, the father of the critical players, Enlil and Enki, served as head of the Anunnaki Council of 12. Ni-bi-ru may be constructed from the digital cuneiform script using 3 syllables. Therefore, the Anunnaki came or were sent from Anu to the earth. When Enlil met Ziusudra on Mount Ararat, he called his race Anunna. Therefore, Anua is an alternative spelling of Anunna. Similarly, as shown in the previous example of Nibiru, the cuneiform script is assigned a unique set of uniform hexadecimal codes. It is imperative to look at the planet Nibiru with the word heaven, as used in the Bible when re-examining prayers like Our Father who art in heaven, which sheds new light on the Father in heaven, namely Anu. So the prayer had to originate among his descendants on earth, Enlil, Enki, Ninmah, or Ninhursag. Why did the Anunnaki leave Nibiru to come to earth? Nibiru orbits the Sun in an elliptical retrograde orbit 3,600 years beyond Pluto. According to maps found in Anunnaki lands and reports from the IRAS Naval Observatory, Sumerians lived on a brown dwarf in Nibiru. Mount Graham's intense Catholic focus uses the luciferscope to watch for Nibiru's arrival. Nibiru has already arrived. Why would an advanced civilization on Nibiru send a team of scientists to Earth? Political struggles for power were ongoing, and environmental pressures attracted the attention of the ruling council of Nibiru. Brown dwarfs do not receive enough solar radiation to maintain a habitable surface temperature as the Earth does, given its optimal distance from the Sun. Nibiru's atmosphere was created artificially or by gases and steam released by its geothermal heat. A planet in its outer orbit is frequently exposed to shallow levels of direct solar radiation. During the close perigee, the atmosphere receives the most significant radiation dose. Sitchin's published history timeline states that approximately 450,000 years ago, life on Nibiru faced extinction because of a deteriorating atmosphere and radiation exposure. The situation was dire during Nibiru's close perigee with the Sun. In Nibiru, Anu wrests control of the kingship from the unjust ruler Alalu, which led to his exile. Alalu escapes in a spacecraft and discovers gold on Earth in anticipation of his exile sentence. During Alalu's veiled attempt to save Nibiru's atmosphere, he uses his precious metal discovery as a peace offering. The ionized shield will shield the planet from solar radiation by dispersing ionized gold particles into the planet's degrading atmosphere. Enki, Anu's scientifically minded son, is dispatched to assess the chance of recovering Alalu's reported gold from Earth. Enki departed for Earth approximately 5,000 Earth years later, 455,000 years ago, noting that a Nibirian year equals 3,600 Earth years. According to Sumerian records, the first city colonized by the Anunnaki was Eridu, in the Persian Gulf headquarters, including the Sumerians' King's List. Enki and a small group of support staff began prospecting for gold in the waters of the Gulf soon after arriving on Earth. Anu sends his younger son, Enlil, to help Enki speed up the gold recovery process. Enki and Enlil invited Anu to Earth to guide the arduous mining task, given the infrastructure required to crush rock and process gold-laden ore. Enki moved the mining operation from the Persian Gulf to the Zambezi River in South Africa, where the ore was mined. Anu arrived on Earth approximately 450,000 to 360,000 years ago, and his son Enki informed him of the current status of gold mining on Earth. The brothers argued over which of them would take care of the mining operation in Africa and oversee the command headquarters in Mesopotamia, specifically Nippur. In the Atrahasis story, Anu, Enlil, and Enki drew lots to determine which mission they would pursue separately, creating a space between the two half-brothers that were often at odds. According to Sumerian accounts, Enki was Anu and Antu's firstborn son, and Enlil was the rightful heir. According to Niburian inheritance rules, the rightful heir is the male's child and half-sister. The Anunnaki did this based on their scientific knowledge. It is important to note that the female contribution to the genetic material includes mitochondrial DNA that the male contribution does not, which predisposes the genetic bloodline toward maternal descent. Enlil governed the Mesopotamian region, where Terah and his son Abram would ultimately serve him in the temple at Ur. The Indus Valley region was given to Anu's favorite granddaughter, Inanna, while the Anunnaki kept the Sinai Peninsula. To restore Niburian's degenerating atmosphere, Enki was sent to Abzu, Africa, to speed up the gold mining operation. Enki returned to Nibiru to run the kingdom. In 3760 BCE, the division took place and was completed. Ninhursag, Enki's half-sister and a medical officer, travelled to Earth approximately 415,000 years ago and established a medical clinic at Shuruppak. Niburian astronauts needed medical support during their space travels. The Anunnaki complained about aging effects that were not noticeable on Nibiru. On Earth, they experienced faster circuits than Nibiru, which had a much slower circuit, 3,600 years. Sumeria became home to several cities, adding to the Eridu built by Enki upon his arrival. The mining operation and subsequent ore processing were carried out of these cities, and the infrastructure needed to stay in touch with Nibiru. Ancient astronauts' historical event is contextual to the account's background information. The Anunnaki Council of 12 met approximately 300,000 years ago in the southern African domain of Enki to discuss how to increase gold production rates. Several subservient workers were brought to Earth by the higher-ranking members of the Anunnaki Council, supposedly Enki himself. Even though they were called working-class agents, they were highly advanced compared to humans. Atrahasis refers to the miners as Ijiji, but the Lost Book of Enoch calls them watchers. Ijiji were assigned labor-intensive tasks, including dredging rivers, digging and constructing aqueducts, building cities, and mining gold ore in southern Africa. During their alien deployment to Earth, they were not provided with female companions, measured in Niburian orbit lengths as 3,600 Earth years. Ryan Morhen translated the first tablet from the Atrahasis, the Old Babylonian version. Atrahasis, tablet number 1. When the gods did the work and bore the burden, the load was too heavy. The work is too challenging, the trouble too great. Ijiji was made to carry a 7-fold workload by the mighty Anunnaki. Their father Anu was the king, their counselor, warrior Enlil, chamberlain Ninurta, the canal controller Anuji. As soon as they gained Anunnaki lands, after casting lots, the gods decided. Anu ascended into the sky. Enlil also took the earth for his people. Enlil also took the bolt that bars the sea. Enki was assigned a too far-sighted task after Anu ascended to the sky. The gods of the Aspu had descended below, the Anunnaki of the sky. The workload was put in Ijiji. Ijiji dug canals. The Ijiji dug out canals, the lifelines of the land, to clear the channels. Clearing the land's lifelines, the channels, was necessary. The gods dug the Tigris riverbed. Then the Euphrates were dug up, settling down in the depths. The Apsu of the Anunnaki inside it raised its highest point of all the mountains. They carried the excess burden for 3,600 years, arduous work, night and day. Grumbling and blaming each other, they groaned. They groaned under the weight of the excavated soil. I would like to engage the chamberlain. Get him to relieve us of our tedious work as well. The Ijiji, summarizing the key points of the first tablet, surround Enlil's encampment and demand to be relieved of their excessive workload. On Nibiru, Enlil and Enki's father, Anu, are summoned for advice and counsel. Enki is also invited to help find a solution to the unrest in the mines. The Ijiji gold miners are temporarily appeased with promises of work relief. As a replacement for the Ijiji gold diggers, Enki and Ninhursag, his half-sister, design a genetically engineered primitive worker. We will introduce the reader to evidence that supports Anunnaki's presence on Earth. Anunnaki evidence on Earth. Are there any physical signs the Anunnaki were here on Earth? The categories of evidence examined include astrological, technical, documentary, and biological evidence. On the Enuma Elish clay tablets displayed at the University of Pennsylvania Museum, the Sumerian creation tale is represented as an allegory of celestial warriors whose skirmishes and exploits led to the planets of their hosts forming circuits around the sun. In the Babylonian version, cuneiform inscribed clay tablets contain the tale approximately between 1936 and 1901 BCE. Approximately 2000 BCE was the height of Marduk's reign, according to Sumerian records, the first son of Enki and the national deity of Babylon. The creation tale of Nibiru is said to have existed in an older version, in which Nibiru was named the homeworld. Marduk replaced Nibiru as the homeworld in OBV. There are exceptions to the accurate representation of planet names and their orbital distances from the Sun. The Babylonian creation account reveals an advanced knowledge of our solar system, which was only recently confirmed by modern science. We may be only now reaching the point where we can validate the Babylonian epic of creation based on current scientific knowledge. The Sumerian records refer to 10 planets, compared to our understanding and acceptance of only 9 today. Instead of 9, there are 10 planets in the Sun and Moon's account. Below, I summarize the epic of creation. Mercury and the Sun conspire to destroy Tiamat at the story's start. Mercury is shielded from the radiation of the Sun when Enki learns of the plot. Mercury is put to sleep by Enki, as is the Sun. Mercury is in a sleepless daze. Enki, another name for Ea, unfastened his belt, removed his crown, took off his radiance mantle, and put it on himself. This means Mercury's orbit has temporarily been altered because of the solar radiation from the Sun, as Enki's planet is Neptune. For 900 years, Nibiru rested on top of the Sun, captured in the Sun's orbit. This was during the reign of Enlil. Solar radiation affects Ea, Damkina, and their firstborn son, Marduk. As the progeny of the high-ranking Anunnaki Council members, Marduk establishes his right to be born with this account. Tarsus, Pisces, and Capricorn are signs of the zodiac in the heavens. Earth's moon, Kingwa, held the tablet of destiny, which was aligned with Tiamat. In response to Tiamat's fury, stirred by the sun, Neptune turns back and reports to Anshar, Saturn. As a result, Tiamat veers off its orbital path. Marduk, Nibiru, volunteers to help disband Tiamat's forces. Nibiru's orbit captures a constellation of planets, stars, and remnants of Tiamat. Saturn's gravitational pull pulls Nibiru into its orbit, providing a calming effect. Mercury and Venus are ancestors of Saturn, which is alluded to by sending a satellite or moon from Saturn to Mercury and Venus. In Hulu Wind is a whirlwind that releases 7 winds against Tiamat. An asteroid, Arrow, strikes Tiamat, splitting it open. The result is the destruction of Kingwa. 1/2 of Tiamat's mass is trampled, sending it to the roof of the sky, drawing a thunderbolt across it and a guard to hold it in place. The water was arranged so that it coagulated into an ocean. After correcting Nibiru's course, the location was affixed to the stands of Enlil, planetary affiliation Jupiter, zodiac symbol Taurus, and Enki, zodiac affiliation Pisces, planetary affiliation Neptune. Formerly, the Earth's moon belonged to Tiamat. The reader should read the Enuma Elish in its original form to understand the detailed creation epic. According to this allegory, at the point of creation in our solar system, Tiamat, Uranus, had an established orbit between Mars and Jupiter. Earth had not yet been created. The origins of Nibiru have been the subject of various hypotheses regarding its capture in our solar system's orbit. As a result, the battle for the orbital position began. As Nibiru entered its orbit around the Sun, passing the outer planets, introduced gravitational forces that tilted Uranus. Pluto was dislodged from its orbit around Saturn by these forces, promoting it to planethood before it was demoted. On its path to solar perigee, one of Nibiru's satellites struck Tiamat, and on its following orbital path, Nibiru hits Tiamat directly. A large portion of Tiamat broke off to become the Earth, with the remnant debris becoming the asteroid belt, currently positioned between Mars and Jupiter. When the Earth was in its present orbit, it congealed into a solid planet, capturing Nibiru's moon as its own. The Anunnaki creation account, read every spring in Babylon, seems to corroborate some modern scientific analysis of Earth's rifts in the Pacific and its colossal moon. It is an accidental panspermia instead of the one proposed. According to him, intelligent beings intentionally seeded planet Earth with alien life forms. The seeds of life could also have been transferred to Earth by an impact from Nibiru. Another planet in our solar system is the Anunnaki's home planet of Nibiru, whose apogee is beyond Pluto, in a 3,600-year retrograde orbit around the Sun. Dr. Robert S. Harrington, the former chief of the U.S. Naval Observatory. Pluto and its moon Charon were discovered by Tombaugh in 1930 and 1978, respectively. IRAS, an infrared astronomical satellite, was launched in 1983 in response to wobbles in the orbits of Uranus and Neptune. Scientists used the satellite to seek the planet suspected of causing the wobbles. Researchers concluded that an object 4 times the size of our planet had been detected by the IRAS. In 1992, Harrington and Van Flandern of the Naval Observatory published a newspaper article. They used all the information available. According to their observations, they believe a 10th planet has been discovered in our solar system. This planet is called an intruder planet. Dr. Harrington and Zechariah Sitchin, both familiar with Sitchin's writings about a 10th planet, met to correlate IRAS's findings with the Enuma Elish, an ancient Babylonian creation epic. According to the IRAS, other space probes like Pioneer 10 and Pioneer 11, Harrington agreed with Sitchin that Nibiru was. Every 3,600 years, a planet as immense as Nibiru would pass between Mars and Jupiter. Because of Nibiru's passage, pole shifts and reversals have occurred, causing changes in Earth's precession. Additionally, the perihelion may be responsible for potentially dangerous meteors and debris carried by asteroids. Building evidence and technology. It is easy to find unusual artifacts around the world, especially those that seem to contradict the known capabilities of the civilization. Hieroglyphs found in the Egyptian temple of Abydos depict rockets, airplanes, submarines, and even an advanced helicopter similar to the United States AH-64 Apache helicopter. Baalbek, Lebanon, has the trilithon stones. For building materials, why choose the most challenging one? Large blocks of stone weighing 1,000 tons or more. Likely they did so because they could, and it was easy for them. Among fascinating discoveries was the temple of Hathor atop the biblical Mount Sinai. The temple contained a strange substance created by smelting gold. This find was the rediscovery of monoatomic gold by David Hudson. The massive stone blocks used in temple construction may have been moved using these anti-gravity superconductors. Furthermore, there is evidence that the Anunnaki of a chosen bloodline consumed the monoatomic gold as conical bread cakes depicted on Hathor's temple walls. The short orbital cycles on Earth damaged the Anunnaki DNA. Specifically, the telomeres were damaged by proximity to the Sun. Because of the multipass annealing process applied to the smelting gold, ingestion of monoatomic gold acts to light up the human energy body and serve as a bridge to other dimensions. Antimony and other ingredients were added to the gold to turn it into a white powder and cause it to lose mass. Besides model airplanes, incredible solar and lunar temples aligned to solstices and equinoxes, along with tens of thousands of Anunnaki tablets and written accounts of advanced beings teaching civilizing technologies to indigenous peoples, there is overwhelming evidence that the Anunnaki were here on Earth. Anunnaki astronauts left behind impressive remnants in ancient Mesopotamian cities such as Eridu, Babylon, and Uruk, where Gilgamesh reigned. The following evidence is listed. Baalbek defies current engineering methods. Gold mines carbon dated to the period that Enki was said to have been in Africa approximately 200,000 years ago. Sumerian baked clay tablets describe the Anunnaki, their mission, and personalities. At the University of Pennsylvania Museum, Enuma Elish has a very sophisticated and technically accurate description of celestial collisions. It describes our current solar system's composition. The Romans knew about Pluto in this depiction, but it took NASA until the 1980s to identify it positively. What made them realize this? In 1973, the University of Chicago photographed the city of Eridu with its baked bricks protruding from the sands of the Iraqi desert. The Sumerian king's list confirms the city and king. This is where Earth Station 1 is. In the early 1850s, we understood the reality of those living in the ancient Middle East. Archaeological digs in Mesopotamia have brought the sophistication of the Sumerians to the world's attention. Anunnaki's records of marriage, birth, and legal contracts were mixed with evidence of Anunnaki's history. Sumerian mythological entities were not invented, but found in those records that the Sumerians knew that the Anunnaki astronauts were not from Earth and were elevated to godhood in the various cities where they lived and built ziggurat temples. In the Sumer civilization, the aliens were flesh and blood who interacted with the people and their underlying genetic creation. In Nineveh, Ashurbanipal's library was burned, preserving many clay tablets for antiquity. Sipar's Anunnaki spaceport recently found a sealed 9 by 6 foot room. Anunnaki's unbroken record of Earth's journey is detailed in nearly 400 chronologically ordered clay tablets within the sealed chamber. During his time at Sitchin, Sumerian records of the Anunnaki were made public. The information has only recently become accepted. Tablets have now been digitized to increase speed and accuracy. Atrahasis texts and Sumerian records point to Anunnaki gold mines in South Africa. Anunnaki gold was mined in Africa, according to the Sumerian Atrahasis document. Carbon dating has proved that those ancient mines may have been used by 200,000-year-old miners related to our biological ancestors. Evidence based on biological genetics. Genetic evidence suggests that the Anunnaki developed primitive workers in South Africa near gold mines purchased by Anglo-American plc, a mining corporation. Shimti, Enki's genetics lab, is precisely where the genetic Eve study tracking mitochondrial DNA specified it should be. The genetic Eve study also tracked the mutation of the Y chromosome, leading to the same area and time frame as the genetic Adam study. The Atrahasis describes how animal DNA was mixed with Anunnaki DNA until the ultimate solution, Homo sapiens. The Anunnaki's intelligence claimed that humanity had received accounts of our technological advances, leading to advanced space travel after only 200,000 years of evolution. This contradicts how tool improvement iteratively occurred over millions of years instead of rapid paradigm shifts like the Sumerians. Enki, the scientist, the creator of man. Almost 432,000 years ago, the Ijigai colonized the earth with Enki. Later, the Ijigai were accompanied by lower echelon workers dedicated to gold ore mining. With the mining operations in South Africa, the Anunnaki were in a difficult position. The mining operation was moved to Abzu, Africa, along the Zambezi River after landing in the Persian Gulf, building Eridu, and failing to glean adequate quantities of gold from the ocean. After working in the mines for long periods under what seemed to be harsh conditions, the miners rebelled around Enlil's fortress and demanded relief. According to the account, the miners worked for 3,600 years. One Shah coincidentally equals one Niberian solar year, before retiring. Atrahasis, tablet number 1. Enlil, let us go together. Allah, the counselor of gods, made his voice heard from the throne. Additionally, he spoke to the gods of his brothers. Welcome, let us carry Enlil with us. From his dwelling, the counselor of gods, the warrior, cry battle. His speech caused the gods to set fire to their tools. Their bolts for fire, their weapons for the god of fire. The flare-ups began. As they approached the gate of warrior Elis's dwelling, it was night, the middle watch. The house was surrounded by Nusku and Kalkal, Enlil's guards, alerted him to the rabble surrounding his house. Enlil brought weapons to his dwelling when he discovered the Ijigai miners were surrounding him. Enlil's vizier Nusku ordered the miners to surrender. His father Anu advised him to fetch Enki and seek counsel from him. Anu and Enki had an impromptu council meeting to discuss what to do about the revolting lower echelons of the Anunnaki. Anu, Lord of the Sky, and Enki, Lord of the Apsu, appear on the Atrahasis tablet. These are the most powerful Anunnaki. Enlil spoke up. She got up, and the case moved along. As she spoke to the mighty gods, have they risen against me? Shall I engage in battle? Anu spoke to Enlil, saying, let Nusku go out. Get the word from Ijigai who have surrounded your door. Nusku, fully armed, approached the mob and asked on behalf of Anu, Enki, Enlil, and the Anuji, who was governor, and what the problem was. The anarchy of the miners instructed Nusku to tell Enlil. Every single god has declared war. We have stopped digging. We are suffering under an excessive load. Hearing Nusku's issue on behalf of the fed-up miners, Enlil wept and then turned to his father Anu and asked that one miner be made an example of by being fired publicly. Anu raised his voice. He also asked his brothers, what are we complaining about? Their work was indeed too strenuous, their trouble was too great. The earth resounded every day. We kept hearing the warning signal. It was loud enough. Why are we blaming them? Enki, Ea, asked his brothers' gods. The work was too strenuous, the trouble was too much. A womb goddess, Belet Ili, is present. Let her create primeval man. He must bear the yoke. To bear the work of Enlil, Belet Ili, the womb goddess, is present. Let the womb goddess bear offspring, and let man bear the work of the gods. Nintu, aka Belet Ili, spoke to the most powerful gods and made her voice heard. Making him is not appropriate for me. Enki makes everything pure through his work. I will use the clay he gives me. Enki addressed the gods and made his voice heard. I will wash on the 1st, 7th, and 15th of each month. Thus, one god should be slaughtered. In addition, the gods can be purified by immersion. Nintu must mix clay. He was flesh and blood. He was also a god and a human king. it will be mixed with clay. I want to hear the drumbeat forever. Let God create a ghost from his flesh and proclaim it to be his living sign. Furthermore, let the ghost exist so that the slain God will never be forgotten. Yes, 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 said the assembly. The powerful Anunnaki assigns the fates. As a result, the Anunnaki Council, led by Anu, decides that Enki and Nintu, the medical officer, also known as Ninhursag, should develop a primitive worker to replace the rebellious Ijigai miners. Now crowned as mistress of all gods, Nintu addressed the Anunnaki Council after eventual success. Multiple genetic experiments, failures, and mishaps are recounted in length in the Atrahasis. Even the mother of humans has to submit a TPS report to justify her accomplishment to her boss. I did a great job. I completed the work you ordered from me. By destroying his intelligence, you have slaughtered a god. Thanks to me, you no longer have to do the tedious work. Man has been subjected to your will. Genetic manipulation is understood in modern civilized societies, but it is so common that it is not a big deal. It is possible that the Anunnaki, who lived at least 450,000 years before our civilization and had conquered space travel, could do in vitro fertilization. The Atrahasis account says they certainly could. This is a severe challenge to the idea of man as a creator. It makes me wonder if the biological scientist of our century performs any different functions than Enki did in his African laboratory. Observe the Anunnaki concept of transferring a spirit from a sacrificed being to another. This is like stories of underworld energy, soul maintenance. According to the Enuma Elish creation story, the collision between Nibiru and Tiamat, which became the earth, could have contaminated the earth with the seeds of life from Nibiru. According to Enki's writings, those seeds of life came from the creator of all. So even the Ijigai, who were sometimes called Anunnaki, had a concept above a god. Based on Nibiru's evolutionary process, Enki regarded the bipedal hominids found on the African plains as a species. As a result, the evolutionary boost provided to early hominids was not a permanent change, but a temporal head start. Humanity is indebted to a creator of all for the seeds of life. The genetic seed of Enki was the archetypal Adapa, the first human to carry the Anunnaki mark. Our hybrid Anunnaki genes contain the ancient astronaut identity and intelligence. Given the exact age of the Atrahasis tablets, dated to 1700 BCE, an important point is brought to the reader's attention. Having attempted to eliminate all references to the other members of the Anunnaki Council in the Torah narrative, especially any reference to Enki, the Enlilite perspective describes the background scene of a historical biblical flood. The Sumerian flood account was copied and changed to create the Genesis account. Hebrew priests held captive in Babylon wrote the Genesis account. During their captivity, they learned the truth about the biblical flood. Enlil, however, became the monotheistic ancient astronaut god they worshipped. They were terrified of Enlil's wrath, after all. The sons of God saw the beauty of the daughters of men as the number of men increased on earth. The sons of God, who could choose whom to marry. The Lord replied, "My spirit will not contend with man forever, because he is mortal. His days will be 120 years. In those days and afterward, when the sons of God married the daughters of men and had children with them, the Nephilim was on earth. Their renown was legendary." Genesis refers to the destructive flood caused by a different catalyst than the Atrahasis account. The Sumerian account describes Enlil as furious at human noise and wanting to silence them. According to Genesis chapter 6, verses 1 to 8, the Nephilim took human wives, potentially breaking a galactic law by marrying a genetically enslaved person. Enlil ignores this and bases the extinction of humankind on how evil men were. Man's wickedness on earth had become so severe that the Lord saw that every thought in man's heart was evil all the time. Having created man on earth, the Lord was grieved. His heart was filled with pain. Therefore the Lord said, "I will wipe humanity from the face of the earth, whom I have created." The Genesis account and the Atrahasis account can be compared. A casual observer should readily detect two bald-faced lies. In Genesis 6:5, Enlil does not have created humankind. According to the Atrahasis, Enki and Ninmah were solely responsible, predating the Genesis account by 1,700 years. Are humankind's thoughts continually evil, including when they toil in the mines for Enlil's gold ore? The genuine complaint in the Atrahasis account was that humankind was noisy and could not sleep? Was it too much trouble, or were the ideas of his arch-rival brother's prolific offspring rising against his authority more likely than the facts? Using terminology in Genesis 6:5 suggests that the biblical ghostwriter Enlil was not a trained scientist. The Anunnaki knowledge of good and evil was present in Sumeria, the Eden, and was used by the Anunnaki. This plant had a transformative effect at the DNA level, changing human consciousness. Enlil tells Adapa in the Garden of Eden that if he eats it, he will die. This lie is countered by Enki, who assures Adapa that he will not die, but become one of us, one god. Enki tells the truth and is ostracized and symbolized as a snake, whereas Enlil lies and proclaims himself to be God. Enki's stated outcome of Adam not dying but realizing his nakedness proves a lie. Enlil did not want the seed of the knowledge regarding good and evil consumed for this very reason. His view was that access to higher consciousness should not be controlled. Unexpected genocidal acts followed Enlil's genocidal actions. According to the first man breeding program, humans became prolific and loud after 600 years. Less than 600 years have passed since 600. Additionally, the country became too large, the people too many. There was much noise in the country. Enlil was forced to listen to their clamour as God grew restless. In his address to the gods, he said, "There is too much human noise. I am losing sleep over it. The Sharupu disease shall break out." This seems to be the beginning of the all-out conflict between Enki and Enlil. Enki created humanity with the aid of Ninhursag, freeing the gods from the toil of the African gold mines he promised. He would be offended if he heard his half-brother Enlil ordered the release of a disease on the populace, whose obvious intent was to wipe out the source of the noise, namely humanity. The book will explore other deep-seated sources of conflict between the two. They included birthright, inheritance, and official rank. The Bible corroborates the timeline from the creation of the Adapa to where Enlil wanted to end them, namely 600 years later. Noah was around this age at the time of the flood. The floodgates of the heavens were opened on that day, in the 600th year of Noah's life. There were 40 days and nights of rain. Atrahasis contradicts the 40-day continuous rain in the Sumerian account, stating only 7 days. Also interesting is the age shown in Genesis 5 from Adam to Noah. Mahalalel's age is 895 years, and Jared's age is 962 years. Would it be possible that the ages were just exaggerated, or could the Anunnaki bloodline, in a more pure state, before dilution, after generational mixing with humanity, account for the exceptional ages noted? It is also worth noting that the Anunnaki had a genetic age constraint on their primitive workers. Therefore, they had the intelligence to follow instructions in the mines and a short lifespan to prevent overpopulation. Humankind was given a maximum lifespan of 120 years in Genesis 6:3. The Atrahasis account agrees with this. The oldest person recorded in history was Miss Jean Calment, a Frenchwoman who lived from 21st February 1875 to 4th August 1997. She was 132 years and 184 days old. It appears she broke the Anunnaki genetic mold by a small amount, namely 2 years and 164 days. Despite the multitudes of species that have lived on Earth, the 120-year genetic design target appears to have worked well. Atrahasis establishes a close relationship between Atrahasis and the mighty god Enki near the end. According to the genealogy in the Lost Book of Enoch, Atrahasis was the son of Enki and Batanash, the wife of Lamech in biblical times. Atrahasis, Enki's son, coordinates a rebellion among humankind, instructing it on how to perform a peaceful protest and shame the powers, Enlil, into ceasing the punishment by Sharupu disease, whatever it was. Enki's intercession has worked, much to Enlil's dismay, as he clenches his jaws to prepare for the next attack on human fodder. Enlil orders a revolutionary, genocidal tactic. Enlil addressed the most powerful gods. "I am losing sleep over humankind's noise. I am losing sleep over their racket. Stop supplying food to the people. Let the vegetation be too scarce to satisfy their hunger. Adad should wipe away his rain. Iskur-Adad is Enlil's son. Let no floodwater flow from the springs below. Let the wind sweep, strip the ground bare, and let the clouds gather, but no rain. Nisaba should stop up her bosom if the field yielded a diminished harvest. They will never be happy. In the same way, Enki runs intercession on behalf of the people, teaching them how to manage the ill will of his half-brother, Enlil. Enki demands the people resist by not praying to their goddess and shaming Iskar Adad to prevent rain on the crops. Enki's intercession again works, but only temporarily. In his multi-pronged assault on humanity, Enlil persists. He sends other diseases to silence them. Humanity was afflicted with sickness, headaches, Shurupu, and Asaku diseases. Nisaba turned away from her breast as the yield of the field decreased, as the dark fields turned white, as the broad countryside bred alkali, the earth clamped down her teats. Nothing sprouted, no grain grew. A baby could not get out of the womb because it was too tight. The people were inflicted with Asaku. By the end of the second year, the storehouse was empty. During the third year, the storehouse was still empty. Is this correct? Starvation changed the looks of the people. After the fourth year, their well-set shoulders slouched, their upright shoulders bowed. Often people walked out in public, hunched over. As the fifth year approached, her daughter would watch her mother come in. Even a mother would not open her door to her eldest. The eldest daughter would watch the scales at the sale of her mother. When her daughter turned 6, a mother would watch the scales at the sale of her daughter. They served up a daughter as food. They served up a son. Atrahasis again seeks his lord Enki to protect himself and what is left of humankind from the genocidal onslaught that Enlil has brought. This request for help once again leads to conflict between the two brothers. Enlil, unhappy with the destruction and disease he has brought to humanity, orders Enki to manufacture a flood to wipe out the remaining humans. But Enki refuses. The Anunnaki could manipulate the weather with technology like HAARP, but it is not clear in these circumstances that the Anunnaki caused the flood, but by gravitational forces wrought Nibiru's passing Earth, en route to a 3,600-year solar perigee. A tsunami generated by slipping ice sheets at the poles, potentially to wipe out Mesopotamia, was to be kept from man by Enlil. The Anunnaki caused the flood by using a flood weapon, or expecting it to rival based on perturbations in the heavens, but Enlil took credit for it to increase his perceived power to punish. The strange deeds and attitudes specified in the Atrahasis account of Enlil and his crimes against humanity should strike a chord with wrath and vengeance. Because Enki was concerned for his son, Atrahasis, in anticipation of a planned or accidental flood event, he changed the oath he was asked to swear to the Anunnaki Council, not to warn humans of the impending floods and disaster. Instead of warning Atrahasis directly, Enki oversees his speech to the wall of the reed hut, where his son has taken refuge. Atrahasis is instructed to build a boat. Listen to me constantly, wall. Reed hut, pay attention to everything I say. Demolish the house, build a boat. Save living things instead of possessions, your boat. Roof it like an apsu, so that the sun cannot see inside. Build upper and lower decks, and the tackle must be robust. Bitumen is thick to provide strength. You will receive rain here. He filled the sand clock. The amount of sand needed for the flood was 7 nights' worth. As noted previously, it rained for 40 days in Genesis, versus 7 days in the Atrahasis. It looks like Enlil is trying to blame Enki for the flood symbolically. In order to achieve this, he changes the rain days' number to the same number of days assigned to Enki, i.e. 40. It would be uncharacteristic of the brothers to act in this manner. Either way, Atrahasis is the real nautical saviour of humankind, the biblical Noah. King Shurupak was 600 years old and served as a medical centre for Ninhursag. Nintu, Beletli, Mami, many names for her. She later became known as Isis in Egypt. Atrahasis recounted the tale people left behind would buy once he left their beloved city. According to him, Enki and Enlil were at odds, and since the city was in Enlil's region, Mesopotamia, it would be best to leave the region and go to Africa, Apsu, to find safety in Enki's domain. We can find a very detailed account of Noah's Ark on the tablets, complete with full-blown Sumerian details. According to many cultures, the Great Flood occurred at the end of the last ice age, approximately 11,000 BCE. With the aid of an Anunnaki pilot Enki had placed on board the vessel, Atrahasis landed on the highest mountain peak in the area, Mount Ararat, following the flood. The Anunnaki spotted Atrahasis' boat from their airborne craft, and the Anunnaki landed on Mount Ararat to investigate the matter further. Enlil saw the boat and was furious with the Ichigai. The mighty Anuna agreed together on oath. No form of life should have escaped. How did anyone survive the catastrophe? Enki shouted to the mighty gods, "I did it in defiance of you. I protected life by making sure it was preserved." Enki created humankind from his DNA and rebelled against his brother Enlil's genocidal order to wipe out the primitive workers, saving his son Atrahasis from the flood that wiped out the Mesopotamian civilization. Here is the story in black and white. Okay, baked clay to start with. Enki created humanity from his genes and rebelled against an order by his brother Enlil to wipe out the primitive workers, saving his son Atrahasis from the massive flood that decimated the Sumerian civilization. Primitive worker. According to the Atrahasis, if the primitive workers received intelligence from one of the Ichigai, what would prevent the humans from exercising their intelligence, realizing that they were enslaved and revolting as their predecessors had? The Anunnaki designed primitive humans as enslaved people, intending to control, manage them for mining and construction work, stating in the Atrahasis that intelligence was built in as part of their design. One is not making a robot with a limited command set, which creates a challenge for the creator. An entity with intelligence can gain a sense of self or a center of gravity instead. In the end, this will lead to rebellion and independence. The Anunnaki and the Ichigai were confronted with this dilemma, as the Anunnaki in charge needed general labor to build cities and mines. Because of the Ichigai, we face the same issue on Earth as we do today. Their primitive consciousness was most likely instilled deliberately at a lower level than the Creator, effectively relegating them to being enslaved workers. Evolution never stops. The primitive worker eventually develops enough self-identity over time, especially if given the intelligence to handle more complex tasks, just like Adam and Eve in the Garden of Eden. Enlil knew that self-consciousness was antithetical to slavery, so he realized Enki had plans to create a workforce like them, a symbol of power. As well as allowing for rapid population growth to meet labor needs, breeding capabilities ensured a productive workforce. Over time on Earth, the Ichigai enslaved people became conscious of themselves and revolted against their slave taskmasters, the Anunnaki elite, demanding a replacement slave workforce, e.g. Enki's primitive workers, anatomically modern humans. It took some time for this to happen. The ancient astronauts, who were less accustomed to Earth's shorter solar cycle, may have helped in finding their identity by the difference in time experienced by the Ichigai. Shahs are equal to 3,600 years, according to the Ichigai. Lord Enki surely knew this, since he intended to jumpstart the evolutionary process that was already underway on Earth. Enki recognized that the seeds of life on Earth came from Nibiru, and Neanderthal humans were present on Earth already, which he mentioned finding in Africa and reporting to the Anunnaki Council. The Anunnaki Council approved the genetic intervention with the local Neanderthal species, since in their minds, that was a way to jumpstart the primitive Earthlings to a higher state of evolution. Neanderthals to the primitive worker, no harm, no foul, right? Because of the dice roll between his brother Enlil and Enki over who would stay in Mesopotamia, Enki was assigned the African gold mining operation. Enki then established himself in the Abzu region of Africa to oversee the gold mining operations. The Anunnaki reportedly faced environmental and atmospheric threats on their planet as well. As a result, the mission to Earth to obtain gold for the anodized layer in the atmosphere was very urgent. Enlil was furious over the subversive tactics and knowledgeable beings that Enki had created, and which Enki marveled at, just as Enki himself was. Enki must have outdone himself playing genetic god, given his lustful reaction to the primitive workers. In Mesopotamia early on, Marduk brags to his son about finding beautiful earthlings bathing in a stream and their encounters with him. Marduk laughs and remarks on Enki's previous reputation with the opposite sex. Sarpanit, a mere mortal, was also irresistible to Marduk, who gave up his rights as a god on Nibiru to marry her. Enlil also led a raid on the primitive enslaved people, returning them to Eden. Enlil may not have appreciated Enki's genetic progress, but the enslaved people were helpful for labor needs. For security and control issues for primitive workers, Enki certainly had the bases covered because of the tension between the brothers. According to the initial records, there were also 600 Ichigai after they arrived on Earth. The idea of creating an indigenous workforce with a higher level of intelligence than even the Ichigai had certainly alarmed Enlil from a command and control standpoint. If the workers were to grow in number, how would he control them? To the small Anunnaki elite present, this would pose a revolutionary threat. Wouldn't a mob of angry miners be able to destroy it quickly? This information is provided to set the context in which Enki persuaded the council to create a primitive workforce. Security and control would be the primary concerns. Enki was probably always looking for ways to undermine his brother's facade, hinder his command effectiveness, and antagonize his brother and rightful heir, Commander Enlil. Given the advanced abilities the Anunnaki possessed genetically, one must consider what communication methods they had integrated into their primitive workers so they could be efficiently commanded and controlled. Communication methods were necessary to control large numbers of enslaved people. The commands were related to assigned group tasks, such as pulling a rope in unison. What would one do with a slave worker who suddenly stopped communicating? It would be too risky. Thoth is the son of Enki, the creator. He advocated for humankind to become sons of God through awakening their energy bodies, chakras, and consequent consciousness, which he designed to be sensitive to the various frequencies associated with the radial distance and frequencies caused by a spherical resonator, such as the Earth. Those who read the Emerald Tablets can get a sense of the advanced energy knowledge Thoth possessed. As evidenced by his staff, he was an expert geneticist, the caduceus. A function of human consciousness connected to DNA was the knowledge of energy matter and the pineal gland. Noah, Gilgamesh, and eternal life. Gilgamesh's epic is the most extensive literary composition written in Akkadian cuneiform script. In the ancient world, King Gilgamesh is known for his famed quest for immortality, a quest that has become a worldwide recognizable theme. In present-day southern Iraq, the narration follows the heroic king of the Sumerian city of Uruk. The Anunnaki gods ordained kingship, the only form of early governorship in Mesopotamia. A king was an exemplary shepherd, maintaining order, military leadership, and security, and performing priestly functions such as creating laws and conducting large-scale building projects. He also served as the link between the gods and the people. In ancient times, kings were likely demigods, a hybrid mix of pure Niburian blood and the genetics diluted for the slave species Adapa. According to the Sumerian king's list, Lugalbanda, the shepherd king, ruled Uruk for 1,200 years. An ancient Sumerian text describes a romantic relationship between Lugalbanda and Ninsun, a full-blooded Anunnaki goddess. In Gilgamesh and Huwawa, the hero consistently says, "Under my mother, Ninsun, and my father, holy Lugalbanda." King Gilgamesh was therefore three-quarters pure Anunnaki blood. Gilgamesh may have been the king and father of Lugalbanda, but he was merely a human. Ninsun, as a full-blooded Anunnaki female, would contribute mitochondrial DNA to her offspring, making 344 Anunnaki. According to Niburian inheritance rules, the rightful heir will be born from the father and his half-sister, perpetuating the dominating effects of mitochondrial DNA. The table below depicts the first dynasty kings of Uruk. The lineage data shows Gilgamesh did not follow in direct succession after his father, Lugalbanda, even though he was king circa 2600 BCE and ruled for 126 years. He succeeded Dumuzi, a son of Enki. Unug was defeated, and the throne was given to Urim, Ur. In the late 2nd millennium BCE, many tablets relating to the Gilgamesh epic were found throughout the Middle East. Some tablets were found in Megiddo, written in Akkadian, while others were in Emar along the mid-Euphrates. There are versions in Akkadian, Hittite, and Hurrian, discussed in Hattusa, the capital of the Hittites in northern Anatolia. Nineveh was discovered in the 7th century during the Kassite kingship of Sennacherib. There is no record of the origin of the famous epic, but it presents the contemporary gods of Mesopotamia in the same way as the Atrahasis, including the members of the Anunnaki Council, Enlil, Enki, and Anu. During his reign as king, Gilgamesh knew humans created by Enki had a limited lifespan of only 120 years. For centuries, Gilgamesh's heroic and emotionally charged quest for eternal life appealed to the audiences in the entire region, just as it did to his Anunnaki predecessors. The sensitive king grieved over the loss of life and dreaded his death as a genetically defective individual, as evidenced by the long lives of the lucky king in Genesis 4 and the many deeds he performed in ancient Mesopotamia. Demigods like the lucky king probably lived much longer than 120 years. Anunnaki was partaking of life-prolonging starfire gold to mitigate the effects of the rapid solar cycles experienced on Earth to prevent the degradation of telomeres. Therefore, the Anunnaki appeared immortal or to have everlasting life. It does not appear that King Gilgamesh had access to the same life-prolonging luxury. Because of his diluted Anunnaki blood, Gilgamesh knew he would not have the same eternal lifespan as Ninsun, his mother. Gilgamesh yearns for eternal life. The perks of being king are many. Gilgamesh had access to otherwise forbidden knowledge kept by astronauts in his backyard of Uruk, which must have been tantalizing for him. Inanna and Anu both had temples in Uruk. Anunnaki guarded the MEs, which were reported to number 94 in total. The information stored on ME tablets likely contained details about genetics and related to what appeared to be eternal lifespans for the gods. From this information, ancient astronauts developed civilization on a distant planet. Gilgamesh was well aware of the role genetics play in a long life, as evidenced by the longevity of the Anunnaki enshrined as gods and deified in Mesopotamia, and sought to obtain it for himself. Ziusudra, aka Atrahasis, Noah, and his family landed on Mount Ararat aboard the Ark, instructed by Enki, following the last apocalyptic deluge to hit Mesopotamia. As Enlil soared aloft with several other Anunnaki key figures surveying flood damage, he spotted Ziusudra and his Ark. He was furious that some humans had survived the catastrophe. The truth of his bloodline was revealed to Ziusudra later that evening, while he conducted an offering at an impromptu altar he built on site. Ziusudra's father was Enki, saving him from the destructive deluge. Ziusudra, who was only 50% pure in his Anunnaki lineage, was given eternal life during that meeting with Enlil. It is not completely clear what transpired on the mountain, but according to the Anunnaki writings, most likely it involved a council decision to provide access to a specific plant of life for the transformed and newly renamed Anunnaki club member, Utnapishtim. Anu visits Adapa in heaven. A Niburian host offered the bread of life and elixir to the enslaved mortal Adapa when Dumuzi and Ningishzida led them to meet Anu in heaven, Nibiru, as part of the ritual encounter. Adapa refused the bread and the elixir, following Enki's instructions. More than likely, these concoctions restored the DNA of the Anunnaki, perpetuating the natural renewal process. Considering the rapid aging of the Anunnaki, who worked in Africa's mines for long periods, the renewed process appears to have been copied or re-engineered on Earth. Gilgamesh sought a plant that would produce the same life-extending effects. After failing in his attempt to meet the gods, who were seen taking off and landing rockets on the massive stone platforms at Baalbek, Lebanon, King Gilgamesh devised a plan to find Enki's son. Gilgamesh could discover the secret given to him by Enlil atop Mount Ararat and achieve eternal life for himself if he could find the king of Shuruppak, known as Ziusudra, to the Sumerians, and Noah, to the readers of the canonical Bible. Ziusudra, aka Noah, was renamed Utnapishtim following his changed longevity status and allowed into God's private club on Mount Ararat. Gilgamesh had 75% pure Anunnaki blood. Ziusudra, however, only had 50%. Thus it seemed only fair that Ninsun's son, Gilgamesh, should be treated the same way. About 2600 BCE, this is the catalyst for Gilgamesh's epic tale and the background situation in Uruk. Noah meets Gilgamesh. King Gilgamesh finds the mighty flood exile Utnapishtim in his quest and gets him to reveal the location of the plant of life he seeks, which is harvested in the shallow waters of the ocean. Gilgamesh Epic, Tablet 11. Gilgamesh spoke to him, to Utnapishtim, the far-off. Gilgamesh looked at Utnapishtim. Furthermore, your limbs are precisely the same as mine. You are not different from me at all. Utnapishtim spoke to him, to Gilgamesh, saying, I feel the urge to prove myself against you. Gilgamesh, let me reveal to you a secret that has been kept for a long time. From this point on, Noah tells Gilgamesh a detailed account of what happened before, during, and after the apocalyptic flood. Compare this account in Genesis 7-9. This is a comprehensive account of humankind's origins. Gilgamesh Epic, Tablet 11. You know Shuruppak, a city in the Euphrates. When the most powerful gods caused a flood in that city, it was already old. Their father, Anu, was there. The warrior Enlil served as their counselor, Ninurta as their chamberlain, Anuji as their canal controller. A far-sighted Ea swore an oath of secrecy to them. He repeated their speech to a reed hut. Man of Shuruppak, son of Ubaratutu, dismantle your house and build a boat. Read hut, brick wall, listen to me, read hut, and pay attention. Rather than possessions, look for living things. Save lives by rejecting cattle. Put the seeds of all living things in the boat. When I realized and spoke with my master, Ea, my master, I have listened to the words you spoke in this way, and I will act accordingly. How can I explain myself to the city, to the men, and the elders? Elders? Ea, Enki, spoke up and said, I, his servant, was told to speak to them. Enlil has rejected me, so I cannot stay in your city. Additionally, I cannot set foot on Enlil's land again. My master Ea must stay with me in Apsu. According to this tablet 11 snippet, Utnapishtim attributes his fate to Enki, who warned him about the impending flood, and Enlil, who blessed him with eternal life. Gilgamesh travels home with his prized prize plant by sea, after hunting for the heralded life plant with Utnapishtim and Uruk's king. Considering the symbols alluded to in the epic, those officially attributed to Enki, Lord of the Waters, Gilgamesh is taken away with the plant. In Enki's original genetic design, humankind was restricted to a finite lifespan of 120 years. Gilgamesh was more than likely to live beyond the mortal lifespan limit, yet his destiny was not to be immortal like Noah and the gods. 2 demigods perished here on earth, heroes of old, men of renown described in the Hebrew-edited version of the Bible, New International Version. Alexander the Great of Macedonia, a similar old hero, suffered the same consequences as Gilgamesh. Genesis. In those days and afterward, the Nephilim lived on earth when the sons of God had married men's daughters and had children by them. They were the heroes of the past, the men of renown. Gilgamesh's mother, Ninsun, would be an excellent candidate to study the Anunnaki genealogy, since she came from a pure bloodline. Her mother was an ancient hero, a king of renown and fame. Genesis. As the father of Nimrod, Cush was a mighty warrior on earth. He was a mighty hunter before the Lord. Because of this, it is said, like Nimrod, a mighty hunter before the Lord. His first centers of power were Babylon, Erech, Uruk, Akkad, and Kalneh in Shinar, Sumer. Sitchin dreamed of genetically analyzing an ancient astronaut's body from Nibiru. The discoveries would validate his theories about the Sumerian gods, correlating our missing link origins with the archetypal entwined serpent strands of Anunnaki DNA. Perhaps the junk DNA of the primitive workers, which 95% of it has been deemed useless by scientific research, was the original Anunnaki DNA that had been inactivated. When comparing the original Anunnaki DNA with human DNA, any doubts regarding the Anunnaki origins of humanity would likely be dispelled. The DNA analysis has long been accomplished, as grave sites have been unearthed and physical anthropology has focused on the Sumer region since the century. Its outcomes are unknown to most people. The district of Eanna and the district of Anu were the temple complexes of Uruk, both dedicated to the Anunnaki gods and council chambers in Eanna and Anu, respectively. As one of the oldest and most noteworthy cities in Sumer, Eridu was in the Anu district. Besides their religious functions, temples were also used for state functions. Uruk's impressive temples are home to living beings who regularly visit and live there. It is even more enjoyable to read Gilgamesh's story because of his direct knowledge and interaction with Inanna and Anu. It is said that Saddam Hussein's desire to rebuild Babylon, Marduk's gateway of the gods, was motivated by his belief that he was a reincarnation of Nebuchadnezzar. During the First Gulf War, he hired a team of Germans to run a magnetometer over the ancient site of Uruk. A massive bypass canal was built to divert the water where the famous reeds grew, away from the Uruk area, to access the site. The canal dried the area, allowing archaeologists to access the site. Compared to being overthrown by the world's most powerful military, the United States of America, this archaeological digging activity seems illogical. William Henry is an independent archaeologist who argues that the old ET influence in Sumer and the US focus on Saddam Hussein is William Henry. Henry's central thesis is that a stargate used the Anunnaki Nephilim to travel between Earth and Nibiru in Sumerian times. Using Sitchin's interpretation of a cuneiform tablet of an Uruk ritual text, Henry describes the following scene. Images have been found that depict divine beings flanking a temple entrance and holding poles to which ring-like objects are attached. The divine nature of the scene is revealed by the sun and moon symbols depicting Enlil and Enki flanking. a gateway through which Anu is entering. Gilgamesh, the famous king of the Epic of Gilgamesh, was born in this ancient city of the Sumerian civilization. Anu and his two sons, Enlil and Enki, were the Anunnaki of the Sumerians. Henry proposes that the above scene depicts the elite Anunnaki's transport device. It is most likely that such a device exists in Uruk, the Sumerian city. Would this explain Saddam Hussein's interest in mapping the city of Uruk? Saddam had a secret agenda involving Sumerian artifacts, and we may never know the truth, lest Anu or some other high-ranking Anunnaki reactivate the portal in Uruk or Jerusalem with news media crews present and introduce themselves to the world via some talk show. Zoroaster's winged disc god. Over 1,000 years ago, in ancient Persia, a religious philosopher named Zoroaster simplified the pantheon of early Iranian gods into two opposing forces: Ahura Mazda, illuminating wisdom, and Angra Mainyu, destructive spirit. Zoroaster's ideas have influenced many religions throughout history, including Judaism, Gnosticism, Christianity, and Islam. A stone inscription on the cliffs of Behistun in modern-day Iran depicts the deity Ahura Mazda flying in the winged disc of King Darius I. This is the same symbol used by Enki and the flying disc symbol on the old Persian capital of Persepolis. According to Wikipedia, the inscription was authored by Darius the Great between his inauguration as king of the Persian kingdom in 522 BC and his death in 486 BC. Darius's autobiography, including his ancestry and lineage, begins the inscription. Darius later recounts a lengthy account of events following the deaths of Cyrus the Great and Cambyses II, in which he won 19 battles in 1 year, finishing in December 521 BC, to put down multiple rebellions across the Persian Empire. According to the inscription, the rebellions around the time of Cyrus's death and that of his son Cambyses II were orchestrated by several impostors and their co-conspirators in various cities throughout the empire, who falsely declared themselves kings. During this period of upheaval, Darius the Great declared himself triumphant in all battles, attributing his success to the grace of Ahura Mazda. The Zoroastrian religion describes Ahura Mazda as the creator of God of light and wisdom. Angra Mainyu, the creator of all destruction, was his arch-rival. Readers should be shocked to learn that Ahura Mazda was Enki, and his half-brother Enlil played the role of the demon destroyer, the precursor of the Christian devil, Angra Mainyu. As a result, the Christian devil portrayed himself as God and demonized the actual creator, Ahura Mazda, as Satan or a snake. The latter biblical canon reflects the influence of Isis. For centuries, Zoroastrian served as many Iranians' national or state religion. Invasion by Alexander the Great led to the collapse of the Achaemenid Empire. With the decline of the Sassanid Empire in the 7th century, Islam further marginalized it. The new state religion in Persia is Allah's Islam instead of Ahura Mazda's Zoroastrianism. It was not long before the Enlilites rooted the remnants of their nemesis Enkiites from Mesopotamia after the Mesopotamian territory had been assigned to Enlil. Various Middle Eastern countries, including Iran, Turkey, and Syria, display crescent moon-adorned flags, showing that Enlilites are gaining strength. As the Chaldean dynasty took over much of their northern relatives' empire, Babylon enjoyed a brief but influential period of power and influence. The last king of Babylon, the Assyrian-born Nabonidus, paid scant attention to politics, preferring to obsess over the worship of the moon god and leaving the day-to-day administration for his son Belshazzar. Could Allah be Nannar Sin, Enlil's son, and thus the god of the crescent moon? Since the Mesopotamian territory belonged to the Enlil, his descendants, including the moon god Nannar, would have been welcome there. In 3760 BCE, Nannar was also a member of the Council of the Anunnaki. He is the one who led the Ijigai miners' rebellion in Africa under Enlil's supervision, as evidenced in the Atrahasis. According to historical sources, Nannar Sin's cult centers were prolific in southern Iraq to Syria, Turkey, and Iran. One of the most sacred centers of Islam is Mecca, Saudi Arabia, and the Kaaba stone was initially dedicated to Allah, the moon god. Nannar Sin might be the god Muhammad met in the wilderness. Was Nannar Sin Allah? Let us recall what Atrahasis says. Atrahasis tablet, when Allah made his voice heard, he spoke to his brothers' gods. We must carry Elil. From his dwelling, the counselor of gods, the warrior, cry battle now. After hearing his speech, the gods set fire to their tools. They put aside their spades of fire, their loads for the fire god, and they flared up. According to the author, Allah leads the rebellion to his father's residence, Enlil. Ichigai miners were stirred up by his fiery rhetoric. It mirrors the behavior of the followers of jihad in the Middle East, with spiritual leaders encouraging warlike activities from followers affiliated with the moon god Allah. Ninar, also known as Sin, was the moon god, son of Enlil and Ninlil, father of Utu, sun god, and Inanna. According to genealogy tables and Sumerian records, Enlil had Nanar's Sin's son on the Anunnaki Council. This book aims not to prove that Allah referred to in the Atrahasis is the same God worshipped by Muslims today. However, it would be an exciting research project for those inclined to seek the truth. What would the results of such a study be like today? After learning that Enlil was the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, the God who killed the enslaved people of Mesopotamia, and the God who created the Great Flood to wipe out all the Nephilim on earth.
Mankind lived in paradise for a long time. God said to unnamed colleagues, "Is it possible that he may also take from the tree of life and live forever?" Having eaten the fruit of knowledge, but forbidden from reaching for the fruit of the tree of life. Following Adam's eating of the fruit of knowledge. Since then, man has sought immortality withheld by God. Yet, throughout the millennia, it has gone unnoticed that while concerning Yahweh's tree of knowing, Adam became a part of us after eating it. No such statement has been made regarding, from the fruit of the tree of life, we can live forever. Was it because the promise of immortality made to mankind has a distinctive attribute of the gods, was nothing more than a grand illusion? A king of Uruk, Gilgamesh, son of Ninsun and Lugalbanda, was the first to try and find out. While the tales of Enmerkar and Lugalbanda are enchanting and intriguing, the post-diluvial Luga has to be one of the most compelling. Gilgamesh was the demigod who ruled Uruk from 2750 to 2600 BCE, and had the longest and most detailed records. Throughout Gilgamesh's long epic, he searches for immortality, believing that since 2/3 of him are gods and 1/3 are humans, he should not peer over the wall as a mortal. Genealogically, he was more than just a demigod, more than a 50-50 god. King Lugalbanda, son of Lenana and high priest of Uruk, possessed the divine determinative. Gilgamesh was described as having the essence of Ninurta, Enlil's foremost son, because of his mother Nin. Sun, lady who irrigates, was the daughter of Ninurta and his spouse, Batu. Anu's youngest daughter, Bau, was of a noble family. Gilgamesh's genealogy was not complete. Scholars have called Utu Shamash Gilgamesh's godfather since he was born in the presence of Utu, twin brother of Inanna and grandson of Enlil. Moreover, Gish-bil-Gar-Mesh, his full theophoric name, was also welcomed by the Enkyites because it linked him to Gerbil, a son of Enki and the god of metal foundries. According to a version of the Epic of Gilgamesh in Hittite, he was lofty and endowed with a superhuman size. Attributes undoubtedly inherited not from the father, King Shorty, but from the mother, since Ninsun's mother, the goddess Bau, was true to her nickname Gula, plain and simple, the Big One. Several gods had gifted him with talents and prowess. Tall, muscular, and shapely, Gilgamesh had been compared to a wild bull. Bold and untamed in spirit, he constantly wrestled with the city's youths, which he always won. After Gilgamesh started to demand first rites with brides on their wedding night, the city's elders appealed to the gods to stop him from leaving no maiden alone. Enki-Du, and Enki created, Gilgamesh's double, was designed to walk in the shadow of Gilgamesh and force him to change his ways. A city's elders realize they have an uncouth primitive who eats raw food and is friends with animals, so they place him outside of town with a harlot to learn the ways of man. She also cleaned and clothed him and curled his hair, so that when he finally entered the town, he looked just like Gilgamesh. In response to an incredulous Gilgamesh's wrestling call, Enkidu wrestled him down and taught him humility. They became inseparable comrades. Gilgamesh began to ponder the questions of aging and life and death after losing his haughtiness and prowess. In my city, man dies. My heart is oppressed. Man perishes. My heart is heavy. Godfather, Gilgamesh told Utu, will I also peer over the wall? Will my fate be like this? He asked. His mentor's response did not encourage him. What's the point of roving about, Gilgamesh? The life that you seek will not be found. God created mankind, but he left it in a state of sin. Mankind was assigned death, and enduring life they kept for themselves. Utu Shamash advised Gilgamesh to live day by day and enjoy life, but many dreams and omens convinced him that he could avoid the end of a mortal if he joined the gods in their heavenly abode. Enkidu, he learned, knew how to reach the Anunnaki landing place in the cedar forest, a great platform with a launch tower that served as the Earth terminal for the Igigi. Igigi took Gilgamesh aloft from there, and Gilgamesh asked his mother for advice and help. When Enkidu warned Gilgamesh of the monster Huwawa guarding the place, and told Gilgamesh that only gods can scale the heavens, and only gods live forever under the sun, Gilgamesh replied with words that still resonate today. In the case of mankind, their days are numbered. Whatever they achieve is but a fleeting wind. I will go there first. I urge you to shout, advance, fear not, and should I fall, please help me up. A name will have been given to me. Their response will be Gilgamesh. Huwawa has been defeated against fierce opposition. Seeing that Gilgamesh was undeterred, Ninsun, his mother, pleaded with Utu Shamash to give Gilgamesh extra protection. Ninsun was wise in all ways, and she was also practical. She made Enkidu swear that he would protect Gilgamesh bodily. To ensure his loyalty, she gave him an offer that no one could ever refuse. A goddess with a young wife. Tablet 4, line 5, partly damaged. In the epic, Ninsun discusses which one of his daughters should be the bride with Aya, the spouse of Shamash. By the time Gilgamesh and Enkidu arrived at Cedar Mountain, Utu Shamash had given them divine sandals that enabled them to reach the mountain in a fraction of the time, and they began their adventure. Despite the lack of a map alongside the ancient text, it is clear where the comrades were heading. There is only one cedar forest in the Near East and Asia, in the mountains of Lebanon where the gods' landing place was located. While reaching the mountain range, the comrades were awed by the majestic cedar trees and camped for the night at the foot of the forest. However, during the night, Gilgamesh was awoken by the shaking of the ground and was able to see a sky chamber taking off. The vision that Gilgamesh saw was truly awesome. Though the sun was rising, darkness descended, flames erupted, it rained death as the skies swelled. All that was fallen turned to ashes as the glow of the fire faded. As Gilgamesh saw and heard the rocket ship launch, he knew they had reached the landing place of the gods. At dawn, the comrades sought the entrance, making sure not to walk through. Weapon trees that kill. A coin from a much later time shows the site with a rocket on the platform. Enkidu found the gate but was thrown back when he attempted to open it. He lay paralyzed for 12 days. As soon as he could speak and move again, he begged Gilgamesh to give up trying to open the gate. Gilgamesh had good news, however. He had found a tunnel while Enkidu was immobilized. It might take him straight to the command center of the Anunnaki. A tunnel seemed to be the best way for Enkidu to chat. Trees and bushes overgrew the tunnel entrance, blocked by soil and rocks. As the comrades began to get rid of everything, the guardian of the place, Huwawa, became angry when he heard the sounds. He had the teeth of a dragon, the face of a lion, and came as a flood. His most fearsome feature was his radiant beam emanating from his forehead. This devoured trees and bushes. None could escape its fatal. The comrades had no way out when Utu Shamash spoke to Chem. The king told them not to run away from Huwawa. Instead, let him get close to them and throw dust at him. Following the advice of the comrades, Huwawa was immobilized. The monster was knocked to the ground by Enkidu. Enkidu then put to death the beast. Having gained access to the secret abode of the Anunnaki, the companions relaxed and savored their victory. Taking a bath and refreshing himself, Gilgamesh took off his cloak by the stream. They were unaware that the goddess Inanna was watching the entire event from her sky chamber. Inanna was attracted to the king's powerful physique as she addressed him. "Become my lover, Gilgamesh. Please give me the fruits of your love. I'll take you as my man. You shall have me as your wife." Gilgamesh was sure that Inanna would entice him with offers of a golden chariot, a magnificent palace, and lordship over other kings and princes. But he reminded her that what she promised him, a goddess, was nothing, and that as to love, where did her former lovers end? Gilgamesh describes how Inanna tossed them away, one after another, as if a shoe pinching its owner's foot. The bull of Anu, the bull of heaven, who roamed in the cedar mountain, occurred to Gilgamesh to insult her. Inanna was angry at being rebuffed. She complained to Anu and asked him to let loose on the bull. Inanna insisted that Anu let the beast open, despite warnings from Anu that its release would lead to 7 years of famine. As Gilgamesh and Enkidu fled, they forgot about the tunnel and landing place. They covered a distance of 1 month and 15 days in 3 days using Utu's sandals. Gilgamesh rushed to Uruk to mobilize the fighting force. Enkidu faced the monster outside the city walls. Hundreds of fighters fell into a pit when the bull of heaven snorted. As the bull of heaven turned to face Enkidu, he struck it from behind, killing it. Inanna to Anu initially remained speechless, demanding that the slayers of Huwawa and the bull of heaven be put on trial. A cylinder seal depicts an ancient artist depicting Enkidu gloating over the slain bull of heaven, and a winged disc symbolizes Inanna addressing Gilgamesh. The gods' views differed after deliberating. Enlil said that Gilgamesh did not kill Enkidu, only let him die. He let both Enkidu and Gilgamesh die after he had slain Huwawa and the bull of heaven. Utu said no one should die because his comrades were attacked by the monsters. The land of mines was the punishment for Enkidu. Gilgamesh was spared. Gilgamesh did not give up on his quest for the celestial abode, even though his attempt at the cedar forest had failed. New landing and takeoff facilities were constructed in the sacred 4th region of Ti-Mun, place/land of the missiles, in the Sinai Peninsula to replace those destroyed by the deluge. As part of the grand plan, the pre-diluvial landing platform was created in the Lebanon mountains. 2 great pyramids were built in Egypt as guidance beacons, and a new mission control center was built in Jerusalem. In addition to the landing place in the north, the spaceport was where the gods ascend and descend. Tilmun was a forbidden zone for mortals, but Gilgamesh thought he might be exempt from the prohibition because Utnapishtim, Ziusudra, the person who is famous for the deluge, was taken there. A second attempt at immortality was conceived by Gilgamesh due to his plan. To avoid losing Enkidu, Gilgamesh came up with an idea. Let him sail to the land of mines while en route to Tilmun, and he will drop Enkidu off there. Ninsun appealed once more, and Utu once again gave grudging assistance. So it was, as their ship made its way through the narrow strait leading out of the Persian Gulf, now called the Gulf of Oman, that the comrades were still alive and together. There was a watchtower on the shore at the Narrows. Using a beam similar to Huwawa's, a watchman questioned them. Uneasy, Enkidu cried, "Let's return." Gilgamesh replied, "Onward." The ship's sails were torn and overturned by a sudden wind hurled by the watchman's beam. Enkidu's floating body was discovered by Gilgamesh in the still darkness of the depths, and he dragged it to shore, hoping for a miracle. Until a worm was coming out of Enkidu's nostrils, he sat by his fallen comrade and mourned him day and night. Gilgamesh wandered aimlessly through the wilderness, alone, lost and despondent. "When I die, shall I not be as Enkidu?" he asked. After making the decision, his self-confidence returned, and he turned to Utnapishtim, son of Ubatutu. He kept heading west, guided by the sun. The moon god, Nana-Sin, taught him at night. In one instance, Gilgamesh grappled with 2 desert lions with his bare hands while reaching a mountain pass. The pass was the habitat of desert lions. With their skins he clothed himself, eating their flesh as raw meat. In a low-lying area outside the city, Gilgamesh spotted an inn, and he began walking toward it. As he approached, Siduri, the alewoman, made a bowl of porridge. But when he wore skins and a lean belly, she was frightened. After a while, she believed that he was a famous king searching for his long-lost ancestor. "Now, alewoman," Gilgamesh asked, "what is Utnapishtim?" He said it was beyond the Salt Sea. "I have never seen a crossing, Gilgamesh. As early as the dawn of time, only Shamash, a violent warrior, crossed the sea. The crossing was painful. The waters of death that surround it are barren. The paths to them is desolate. Gilgamesh, how are you going to cross the sea?" Gilgamesh remained silent without an answer. Siduri continued speaking. "A boatman named Ushanabi comes across from time to bring supplies to Utnapishtim from the sea. Just let him see your face. He might be willing to take you across on a log raft." Gilgamesh had to tell him the whole story of his search for immortality, the adventures at the landing place, Enkidu's death, and his wanderings in the wilderness, ending with his encounter with the alewoman, omitting nothing. Like the alewoman, he too was unable to believe Gilgamesh that he had once been the king of Uruk. In order to come and see Utnapishtim, whom they call the Far Away, he wandered across the lands, crossed the mountains, and crossed the seas. The boatman eventually convinced him to proceed in the direction of the Great Sea, which is far away. But he had to take a turn when he reached 2 stone markers and go to a town called Uluya in the Hittite version for permission before continuing to Mount Moshu. In following the directions, but without spending much time in Uluya, Gilgamesh proceeded to Mount Moshu, discovering that it was more than a mountain. Rocket men guard its entrance. The terror in their eyes is unimaginable. They sweep the mountains with their glaring beam. As Shamash ascends and descends, they watch over him. The illustrations prove it. Upon seeing them, Gilgamesh's face darkened in fear. Gilgamesh was just as surprised as the guards as the rocket Moor beam swept over him with no apparent effect. As he watched, he called out to his fellow guard, "The man coming towards us is the flesh of the gods." 2/3 of him were gods, and 1/3 were a human. "We need to know the reason for your visit," they asked Gilgamesh, regaining his composure and approaching them. The question of death and life was something Gilgamesh wished to ask his forefather Utnapishtim, who took part in the assembly of the gods. Having told him about Mount Moshu and the underground passageway, the rocket man said, "There has never been a mortal who achieved that. There have never been travelers on the mountain's trail. For 12 leagues its interior extends. Darkness is dense, and light does not exist. But Gilgamesh was not deterred, and the rocket man could pass through the gate. After advancing in the tunnel in darkness for 12 double hours, Gilgamesh felt a fresh air breeze only at the 9th hour. A faint light appeared in the 11th hour. After that, he stepped out into bright sunlight and saw an incredible sight, an enclosure of the gods with a garden made entirely of precious stones. Among its fruits are carnelians, and among its vines are beautiful sights. Lapis lazuli is used for its foliage. Of stones are made grapes that are too luscious to look at. It is made from white stones. Reeds made of sasu stones are found in it. Water stones are made similarly to trees of life and trees of Ongug. As the description continues, Gilgamesh was found in an artificial Garden of Eden composed entirely of precious stones. He marveled at the sight when he saw the man he had been searching for, the one of the far away. Gazing upon his ancestor from millennia ago, Gilgamesh said these words, "Seeing thee, Utnapishtim, I see no difference between thee and me. I am you as well, even as I am you." After describing Utnapishtim's search for life and Enkidu's death, he then said, "I would like to know, when in thy search for life, how did you come into contact with the congregation of the gods?" Well, according to Utnapishtim, it was not as simple as that. "Here's how it went," he said. The Anunnaki, the great gods, once gathered. The maker of fate, Mamatum. With them, fate decided Shurupak, a city you are familiar with, a city on the Euphrates. The city as well as the gods within it were ancient. The lord of pure foresight, Ea, was with the great gods when their hearts led to the deluge. The following words were repeated to me through the reed wall. Man of Shurupak, son of Ubatutu, demolish the house and build a ship. Live for the present, not for the future. Take the seeds of everything that lives aboard the ship. Utnapishtim described the ship to Gilgamesh and its measurements, and told him that Shurupak's people helped build it because they were told that their god would be rid of his, who was fighting Enlil. Utnapishtim recounts the whole story of the deluge, in which Enlil discovers Ea, Enki's duplicity, and how Enlil, changing his mind, blesses Utnapishtim and his wife to live the life of the gods, as we stand together. Our foreheads were blessed by him. Utnapishtim has been human so far. From now on, he and his wife will be gods. It is far away that Utnapishtim will reside, at the mouth of the water streams. Utnapishtim then asked Gilgamesh, "Who shall gather the gods for the sake of thy sake, so that the life that thou seekest may be found by thee?" At that moment, Gilgamesh fainted, lost consciousness, and collapsed, realizing that his search for eternal life was in vain, as only the gods in assembly were able to grant eternal life. Utnapishtim and his wife stayed awake for 6 days and 7 nights as Gilgamesh slept. Gilgamesh awoke and was bathed and dressed in clean clothes by Usha-Nabi, who helped him return to his city. Gilgamesh was about to leave empty-handed when Utnapishtim stepped forward, pitying him as he did. "What shall I give thee as you return to thy land?" He had a secret of the gods to give him. "Gilgamesh, I address you. I'll reveal a secret. I will tell thee a god's secret. As with the buckthorn, its root is a plant. There are thorns like those on a briar vine. You will have pricked hands. But if thy hands obtain the plant, thou shalt find new life." Gilgamesh was shown where the rejuvenating plant grew, according to Utnapishtim. Gilgamesh opened the water pipe as soon as he heard this message. He tied heavy stones to his feet and plunged to his knees. Seeing the plant, he grabbed it, cutting the stones from his feet. He was cast up by the shore of the well. Overjoyed, Gilgamesh spilled his future plans to the boatman, Ushabti, while holding the rejuvenating plant, a scene that may have been depicted on an Assyrian monument. "There is a plant here unlike any other, Ushabti, with which a man can regain his life's breath. The ramparts of Uruk will receive it. To become young in old age, I will cause you to eat the plant. Man becomes young in old age. It shall have the following name. I will eat from it myself. My youthful state will return to me." Gilgamesh was confident he had accomplished his goal, so he set out to return to Uruk with Ushabti. After 20 leagues, Gilgamesh and Ushabti stopped for a meal. After another 30 miles, they saw a well and stopped for the night. Filling with rejuvenation, Gilgamesh put down the bag with the unique plant to take a refreshing swim, and while he wasn't looking, it began to bloom. The serpent smelled the plant's scent. The plant was carried away from the water by it. Gilgamesh wept as he sat down. Tears ran down his cheeks. Gilgamesh the demigod cried, knowing that fate had robbed him of success once again. One believes that mankind has called ever since, for this was the greatest irony of all. The serpent invited mankind to eat the forbidden fruit without fear of death, but it was the serpent who deprived man of the fruit of not dying. Again, was this a metaphor for Enki? The Sumerian king list states that Gilgamesh ruled for 126 years before his son, called Ur-Luga, succeeded him on the throne. His death was even more mysterious when it came to his burial, as his life was a puzzle. Even if man is partly God, does that mean he is exempt from mortality? His death leaves unanswered this central theme of his tragic story. In ancient times, from Gilgamesh in the 3rd millennium BC up to Alexander the Great, 4th century BC, and to Ponce de Leon, searching for the Fountain of Youth in the 16th century AD, people have striven to avoid, or at least postpone, death. Is this universal and ongoing quest contradictory to what man's creators intended? Is there any evidence that the gods intentionally denied immortality to man in the cuneiform texts and in the Bible? The Epic of Gilgamesh gives the following answer, which amounts to a yes. Creating mankind, death for man, the gods allotted everlasting life to themselves, which they kept. When Gilgamesh began to learn about life and death matters, his godfather, Shamash, told him about it, and again, after Gilgamesh told Utnapishtim the purpose of his journey, it's a pointless man who cannot escape his mortality, as the whole long tale of Gilgamesh suggests. In rereading the tale, however, the apparent irony in the evident answer is that Gilgamesh's mother told him the way to become immortal was to join the gods on their planet. Then it makes sense why the same Shamash who said forget it then helped Gilgamesh twice, he tried to ascend and descend the rocket ships. The attempts were in vain because both were unsuccessful. During Gilgamesh's lifetime, the gods told him a secret. Right here on Earth, we have a rejuvenating plant of life. This raises the question of whether the gods themselves were also immortals. Were they also nourished with such a nutrient? In ancient Egypt, the pharaohs believed that they would live forever if they joined the gods on the planet of millions of years. Elaborate preparations were made to facilitate the pharaoh's journey after he died. The king traveled to the Duat in the Sinai Peninsula, beginning with the exit by his Ka, a kind of afterlife alter ego, from his tomb via a simulated door. A trip to space awaits them there. The Book of the Dead describes underground facilities, rocket pilots, and the breathtaking liftoff of such an underground facility in the Sinai based on a tomb depiction showing a multi-stage rocket ship similar to the Sumerian Din gear symbol. However, the trip was not just to reside on the god's planet. An ancient Egyptian incantation urged the gods to take this king with them so that he might eat what you eat, drink what you drink, and live on the land you live on. Give Pepi the tree of life on which you are sustained, was the appeal in the pyramid of King Pepi, which was painted on its walls in bright colours. A colourful drawing on the walls showed the king accompanied by his wife arriving in the afterlife at the celestial paradise and sipping the water of life out of which there grows the tree of life. Egyptian representations of the gods' food and water of life are reminiscent of Mesopotamian descriptions of winged gods, eaglemen, flanking the tree of life with a pail of water of life in one hand and the fruit of life in the other. The same notions underlying these depictions are based on Hindu tales of the soma, a plant from the heavens, whose leaves' juice conferred inspiration, vitality, and immortality on those who ate it. All this seems by the biblical take on the subject, which is best known from the tale of the two particular trees in the Garden of Eden, the tree of knowing and the tree of life, whose fruit could make Adam live forever, but notes that a divine effort was made to keep man from eating that fruit. To prevent the earthlings from regaining access to the tree of life, God expelled man from Eden, lest he try, and placed the cherubim and the flaming sword at the east of the Garden of Eden, guarding the way to the tree of life. The Sumerian tale of Adapa depicts the Creator trying to prevent man from having divine nourishments. Here we see the Creator of man himself, Enki, treating his own earthling son Adapa as follows. The wisdom he had given him, he perfected his understanding. Knowledge had been given to him, he hadn't given him his last life. Then Enki puts his own efforts to the test. Adapa, the child he has with an earthling woman invited to Nibiru by Anu, is offered the food of life and the water of life, but he is warned to avoid them since both are fatal to him. The warning God gave Adam and Eve that eating the fruit of the tree of knowing would result in death turned out to be false. Would Adam also have lived forever if he had eaten from the tree of life? What if God is only concerned with the possibility of their death, but not their death risks? Ve'acha ve'chae le'olam means, and he ate and lived for olam. It is also possible for olam to refer to a geographical place, in which case it is translated as world. In this context, olam is the Hebrew name for Nibiru, which is also the Hebrew name for the longevity place. God was afraid that Adam would acquire Nibiru's life cycle if he ate from the tree of life. Everlasting life was deliberately withheld from him when man was created, so Enki tricks Adapa into not receiving the divine nourishments. There is no doubt that a food of life exists, but it is not immortality but lasting life, longevity, deliberately withheld from the human race. Although they may have similar short-term results, they aren't the same. How long was life of Olam? Life on Nibiru, an eternal, immortal existence, or simply a great longevity that on Nibiru is measured in Shah units 3,600 times longer than Earth's life? We first learned that gods, or even demigods, were immortals through Greek mythology. The discovery of Canaanite myths at Ugarit on Syria's Mediterranean coast in the late 1920s revealed where these myths came from, the Canaanites. However, the Anunnaki didn't state that they would never die in Mesopotamia. Nibiru's listing of earlier generations says, "Those were our ancestors who have passed away." Tammuz, the anniversary month of Dumuzi, commemorates the death of Dumuzi, a recorded and mourned death, even in Jerusalem at the time of the prophet Ezekiel. Among the punishments for their crimes, Alalu was sentenced to die in exile. Anzu was executed. Osiris was killed and dismembered by Seth. The god Horus died from a scorpion sting, but was resurrected by Thoth. When Inanna entered the lower world without permission, She was seized and killed, but later revived by Enki. The Anunnaki did not claim immortality, nor did they claim to be immortal. There was a false sense of immortality created by extreme longevity. As a result, Ninsun encouraged Gilgamesh to go to Nibiru to gain the life of a god, and not just nourish himself with Nibiru's unique nutrients. Otherwise, what purpose did Ninsun have in encouraging him to go there first? Modern science should contemplate an interesting question. Is the extended life cycle longevity on Nibiru, or anywhere else in the universe, an acquired trait or an evolutionary genetic adaptation? According to the statement associated with Adapa, Enki deliberately excluded a gene or genes associated with longevity from the human genome when the genes were mixed. Can it be found? That a key to unlocking these genetic secrets might be available is where our search for gods and demigods is leading. Life spelling. Translations of the Hebrew Bible by the King James Version and those who followed have sought to evoke in the creation stages described in Genesis a sense of divine spirit, a sense of awe in a creator of all. Nibiru/Marduk's wind satellites, the Elohim, breathed the breath of life into Adam's nostrils and gave him a soul. The Spirit of God hovered over the dark chaos. In this book, we have stopped to clarify misconceptions caused by mistranslations and identify instances where the Hebrew is the literal translation of a Sumerian word, helping define the verses word by word. Samuel Noah Kramer, an eminent Sumerian scholar, pointed out that in the tale of creating Eve from Adam's rib, Tsela in Hebrew, the Sumerian word ti actually meant life, as in nin-ti, lady life. What was done was to extract the life, DNA, from Adam and manipulate it to produce a female genetic line. When one reads the actual Sumerian text used by Ziusudra to describe Enlil's gift to Gilgamesh, the following instances spring to mind. Ti dingir dim mu unna ab-e-de. Zi dari dingir dum mu unna ab-e-de. How are Ti and Z different? Life is usually translated as these two Sumerian words. Ti represents the physical aspects of God, while Z represents the functioning of life. The Sumerian adds dari, duration, to Z to make his point more precise. In addition to physical attributes of godliness, Ziusudra was gifted with durability. Usually, the two lines are translated as life like a god he creates for him, a soul like a god he gives him. This is a masterful translation, but it does not capture the exact meaning of the Sumerian writer's skillful play of words, using Ti just once and Z, as in Ziusudra, later on. Ziusudra's life now had durability instead of a soul. 13. Goddess of Dawn. Bring me to you, Gilgamesh. Few other words can sum up the unintended consequences of the post-diluvial relationship between gods and humans as those spoken by Inanna. As the Anunnaki realized they could simply pick up all the gold they needed in the Andes, staying in the old lands was unnecessary. Ziusudra claims that Enlil changed his mind about wiping mankind off the face of the earth when he smelled the aroma of roasting meat, the Thanksgiving sacrifice of a lamb presented by Ziusudra. However, the change of heart happened as soon as the scope of the disaster became clear to the Anunnaki leadership. The gods cruised around the earth in their aircraft and shuttlecraft as the avalanche of water swept everything away below. The gods cowered like dogs, and the Anunnaki sat thirsty against the walls. In hunger, Ishtar cried out as a woman in labor. The Anunnaki wept with her. Alas, the old days have turned to clay. Ninmah was most affected. I don't know why. When she saw, the goddess wept. Her lips were covered in fever. They looked like flies to her. The rivers are filled with them like dragonflies. A rolling sea took away their fatherhood. Enlil was shocked to discover the survival of Noah when the tidal wave retreated. Mount Ararat reappeared from the endless sea, and the Anunnaki began bringing their craft down. The long verses relate the accusations made against Enki as soon as his duplicity was revealed and his defense. There are also long verses that tell of Ninmar's vehement reprimand to Enlil for his "let's wipe them off" policy. They were created, now they're our responsibility. Enlil changed his mind after talking with her, plus the realities of the situation. Shakespearean Ninmar had played significant roles in the affairs of gods and men before the deluge, and she did so afterward too, though in a different manner. Her mother, Anu, caused her two half-brothers to fall in love, resulting in one of them having an out-of-wedlock child, Ninurta, by Enlil after she was prevented from marrying her beloved Enki. Her significance was that she was granted one of the first 5 pre-diluvial cities, Shurupak, but ultimately created Ameluti workmen for them, earning her the titles Ninti, Mami, Nintur, and many others. She saw that her creatures had turned to clay, so she screamed at Enlil. As a result, she arbitrated between the rival half-brothers. With the respect of both sides, she negotiated the terms of peace that ended the Pyramid Wars and received the sacred 4th region, the Sinai Peninsula, with its spaceport as neutral territory. She is described in a long text as having been given a comfortable residence by her son Ninurta amid the mountains of the Sinai Peninsula, resulting in her Sumerian name, Ninharsag, lady/mistress of the mountain peak, and the Egyptian epithet Ntirmufquat, goddess of turquoise, or Motr, meaning mistress of the turquoise. Egypt worshipped her as Hathor, literally the abode of Horus, and in older age she earned the nickname the Cow both in Sumer and in Egypt, for her claim to be responsible for breastfeeding the gods. However, no matter what title was used for her, it was always reserved for her. She never married the original maiden of the zodiacal constellation we call Virgo, but in addition to her son, due to their lovemaking on the banks of the Nile, several daughters by Enki were born on Earth. The tale, which has been misnomered a paradise myth, ends with Ninhursag and Enki engaged in matchmaking, pairing off young goddesses with Enkiite males. Prominent among them were spouses chosen for Ningishzida, Enki's science-knowing son, and for Nabu, Marduk's son. Mighty matchmaking feats, to be sure, but as we shall see, not the last of Ninhursag's power links and string-pullings through births and marriages, in which she was joined by her younger sister, the goddess Bau, and by Bau's daughter Ninsun. One of the Anunnaki great gods was Bau, who came from Nibiru. Her spouse was Ninurta, making her a daughter-in-law of Ninhursag. Still, Bau herself was Anu's youngest daughter. Nonetheless, these connections served as a bond between the two goddesses, especially since Bau also gained a reputation as a medical doctor, credited in several tales with bringing back the dead. Ninurta was given a sacred precinct built by King Gudea, king of Lagash, in which she and Ninurta settled. The idea of caring for the people and not for gods is a unique aspect of the love for humankind that Bau picked up from Ninhursag. Affectionately known by her nickname Gula, the Big One, she was invoked in prayers as Gula, the Great Physician, and in incursions was asked to put illness and unhealing sores on an adversary. Whatever the case, her nickname accurately reflected her size. Unlike Ninmar, who was always a bridesmaid but never a bride, Ninsun was always a bride, in a way, since Gilgamesh, among others, was said to be one of her sons. After his father's death, she outlived one mortal spouse after another until the end of the 3rd dynasty of Ur. In her family album, should she have one, she would have 11 children with the deified demigod Lugalbanda and her own. Sumer's goddesses, Ninhursag, Bao, and Ninsun, had a hand in guiding its royals both in life and death, including the most challenging female mystery. We shall soon see that Inanna/Ishtar, the fourth prominent female activist, had her own agenda. Following the deluge, the Anunnaki were committed to making the earth habitable again after sharing it with mankind. Everything they did was driven by their vision of becoming interplanetary benefactors. Ninurta created habitable areas by damming mountain passes and draining the water overflow in the Euphrates-Tigris plain because Enki-Ptah created dams with sluices in the Nile Valley to drain floodwaters. Enki and Enlil likely oversaw feats of genetic domestication of plants and animals in a chamber of creation, which was probably situated on the great stone platform that the Igigi used as a landing place. No matter how you view it, Anu did create earthlings as laborers in mines and fields, so when he visited the planet around 4000 BC, he established several new cities, exactly where the pre-diluvial ones had been, and rebuilt pre-diluvial towns. A god Nidaba was in charge of writing, overseeing both regular and specialized tools, or nin. Kashi, who was in the order of beer brewing, another of Sumer's firsts and a significant part of the people's social lives, or Nin-A, who superintended the land's water resources. Based on archaeological finds, many have written of how cities became cult centers for this or that particular deity, where priests provided the resident creators with the leisurely life of privileged overlords. Nisaba is also known as Ninmul-Mula, Lady of the Solar System, an astronomer whose job included providing celestial orientation for new temples in Sumer and Egypt, where she was worshipped as Sesheta. Nanshe, another female deity, is the goddess who determines New Year's Day. With the addition of the traditional medical services provided by the group of Suds, one who gives succor, who arrived with Ninma, the services overseen by the goddesses encompassed every aspect of civilized life. The expansion of the role of goddesses in the affairs and hierarchy of the Anunnaki is expressed graphically in a sacred Hittite site called Yazilikaya in central Turkey, where two equal groups of male gods and female goddesses are carved on rock faces as they make their way toward each other. The actual power and authority that the second and third generations of Anunnaki wielded on Earth led to an increasing feminization in relations between Anunnaki and Earthlings. The nurse Sud was renamed Nin-Lil when she became Enlil's spouse. Her title as Lady of the Command did not make her a commanding leader. The spouse of Enki, Damkina, was renamed Ninki, Lady of the Earth, when he became Enki, but she never became Mistress of the Earth. While Ningal had official portraits of equal status with Enlil's earthborn son, Nanna-Sin, she had no known authority or powers. Ereshkigal and Inanna, daughters of Nanna-Sin and Ningal, differed from goddesses born on Earth. As soon as Inanna was made divine head of Arata, she demanded that it be given full status as the third region. Marduk was capable of choosing kings and ordering them. When Marduk killed her bridegroom Dumuzi, she launched and led an intercontinental war. Ereshkigal was crucial to scientific observations regarding the deluge and, in later times, the determination of the zodiacal ages. In exchange for her disdain for marrying Enki's balding and limping son Nergal, Ereshkigal was promised to become mistress of the lower world, the southern tip of Africa. Text after text describes Ereshkigal's ruthless decision to wield the resulting power. The issue of demigods was one of the key areas where all these changes manifested themselves. The Sumerian civilization, which began some 6,000 years ago, laid the foundations for all of what we call civilization today. As a rule, it resulted in growth, technological advancements, and prosperity. As a king, Lugal, big man, took on the role of administrator, promulgator of laws, dispenser of justice, builder of roads and canals, and maintainer of relations with other centers. The best Lugal could only be akin to the demigods who existed before the deluge, and afterwards too, because they were endowed, in fact or by assumption, with greater intelligence, physical strength, and longevity than the average earthling. Demigods were the best choice to serve as the bridge between gods and mortals, mainly when the king also served as the high priest authorized to approach the god. However, where would these demigods come from in post-diluvial times? From various texts, we can deduce that they were made to order with a few exceptions, but the Sumerian king list does not directly mention the demigod status of the kings who made up the first dynasty of Kish, the one that began post-diluvial kingship under Ninurta. In the same way as king list, we have focused on Etana and his legendary spaceships, concluding that his reign length, 1,560 years, and eligibility for space visits to Nibiru contribute to his demigod status, which is confirmed by the fact that Etana was of the same pure seed as Adapa. The names of some later Kish kings, such as Enmenuna, 660 years, and Enmebaragesi, 900 years, suggest the presence of demigods in between the non-divine successors. After the Enlil group and Ninurta listings in Tablet 1 of the Great God List, 14 names start with D: Lugal, divine; Lugal-Gishta, divine; Lugal-Zaru, etc. In Kish, these individuals were either not known as kings or had other epithet names. It is unknown otherwise, but they are demigods who possess their Dingir determinative. There is a significant change in demigodness where data is provided. Demigodness resulted from the pure seed of a male parent in the pre-diluvial era and for some time afterward. The accession of Mesalim, also written Mesilim, a name whose significance we will examine soon, to the throne of Kish, was a significant change. This telltale inscription can be seen on the silver case discovered among the artifacts. Mesalim, king of Kish, beloved son of Ninkasag. Because the king proved correct by his other inscriptions, would not have dared present the case to the goddess if it were not true. A birth involving Ninhasag as the mother must be taken into account despite her advanced age. This could even include artificial insemination, as was claimed in another instance in which Ninhasag was involved. By writing an inscription regarding a king named Eannatum in the city of Lagash, whose patron god was Ninurta, here renamed Ningursa after the sacred precinct of the town, the Anunnaki are known to have established the demigod qualifications of a future king. During his reign around 2450 BC, Eannatum gained fame as a fierce warrior whose feats were recorded in texts and on monuments, establishing his legendary status. He claimed divine ancestry on a stela, currently on display at the Louvre, through artificial insemination and birth involving several deities. The inscription reads, Ningirsu, the warrior of Enlil, implanted Eannatum with Enlil's semen. We celebrated Eannatum. As he sat on the holy lap of Ninhasag, Inanna named him worthy of the temple of Inanna in Ibgal. She gave him the breasts of her love. Eannatum rejoiced at Ningirsu's news. Ningirsu implanted semen in the womb. According to the inscription, Eannatum is the size of a giantike, as if in response to a future question. The extent of Ningirsu's attack was as follows. He set his forearm on him for 5 forearms. He measured the length of 5 forearms for him. Ningirsu was delighted. King Lagash gave him the throne. Eannatum's span of 5 forearms means he was over 8 feet tall, or about 100 inches tall. The term forearm corresponds to the distance from the elbow to the end of the middle finger, which is on average about 20 inches. We understand that semen of Enlil in the opening statement refers to Ninurta's own semen, which carried the seed of Enlil. As in Sumerian tales of the gods, the Egyptian god Thoth, Ningishzida in Sumer, extracted the semen of the dead and dismembered Osiris and impregnated Isis with it, who later gave birth to the god Horus. A depiction depicts Thoth combining two separate strands of DNA to attain the feat. A similar instance is described in Sumer of the foremost son of Enlil's involvement, and we have an example of that in the case of Eonatum. There are reasons to believe that all 9 kings of the first dynasty of Lagash were demigods somehow. They belonged to the first dynasty of Lagash established by Ninurta in reaction to kingship being transferred from Kish, under his aegis, to Uruk, under Inanna's patronage. Despite being referred to in inscriptions as the son of Eonatum, Entemena succeeded Eonatum on the Lagash throne. Ninurta is the patron god of the revered Kish dynasty. As a result of how he was born, Eonatum claimed he assumed the title of King of Kish, linking him genetically. There is no need to guess how other kings of Kish qualified as demigods, as the capital of Sumer moved from Kish to Uruk when Meskiagashe's father, Utu, was named the first king. In keeping with that fact, it should be remembered that Utu, later known as Shamash or the sun god, represented the second generation of great Anunnaki born on Earth, and that his fathering of the head of a new dynasty represents a significant change from the olden gods who came from Nibiru to an earth-born and bred deity. Lugalbanda, the third king of Uruk, followed this generational change, which also had genetic implications. The mother, in this case, was identified as the goddess Inanna, the twin sister of Utu. She, too, was a second-generation Earth baby of the Anunnaki. Her mother Ninurta and her spouse Bau were also Earth babies. A second divine maternal involvement took place in Uruk with the naming of the goddess Ninsun as the wife of Lugalbanda, and her recognition as the mother of Gilgamesh. With her name clearly engraved on a stone portrait found in Lagash, Ninsun appears elegant and serene. She was a master of court intrigues, as she was the mother of 11 children, Lugalbanda. An example of her matchmaking can be found in the Gilgamesh epic, where she discussed with Aya, the wife of Utu, her choice of a young goddess as a wife for Enkidu to reward him for risking his life to protect Gilgamesh. Ninsun lived long enough to mother several subsequent kings, retaining some of her parents' longevity and heroic stature genes. The drama of her life and death during the first dynasty of Ur will highlight our story. After Gilgamesh's death, Sumer's capital remained in Ur for a little over a century before shifting to several other cities. In approximately 2400 BC, Lugal-Zagesi, a vital king, made Ur his capital for the third time. The goddess Nisaba was claimed to be his mother in several inscriptions. Due totu da di Nisaba, son born by/to divine Nisaba. Pazi kua di Ninarsag, the divine Ninarsag feeds you holy milk. It is well known that Nisaba was the goddess of astronomy. Her father is Enlil, and she is sometimes referred to as Ninurta's sister. However, in the Great God List, she was described as divine Nisaba, a female from divine Ninlil's pure, sacred womb. This meant that she was the earth-born daughter of Ninlil and Enlil, a full sister of Nana-Sin and a half-sister of Ninurta, whose mother was Ninmah. From the 9 kings of Kish, Lagash, and Uruk, whose demigod parentage has been established, here is what emerges in probable chronological order. Etana, son of Adapa, Enki's Meskiagashe. Utu is the father Enmerkar. Utu is the father of Etana. Eonatum, Ninurta's seed, placed on Ninhursag's lap for breastfeeding. Misalim, beloved of Ninhursag, Lugalbanda, mother of Ninhursag, Gilgamesh, sister of Ninsun, Lugalzagezi, mother of Nizaba. 2-3 punches reveal the significant double shift in the affairs of gods and demigods post-diluvial time. First, the earthborn generations replace the founding fathers, progenitors who came from Nibiru. Then, with the help of the sacred breast milk, the last change is introduced. The feminine womb replaces the earlier male womb and the pure semen. The implications of these changes are long-term, so it is essential to understand them. As the role of parenting demigods was taken over by earthborn gods and goddesses, was it simply a matter of nature taking its course, or was it because Earth, not Nibiru, was their home planet that genealogical succession through demigods became more vital? According to some theories, the changes from Nibiru to Earth affected both the longevity of the gods and demigods and their physical appearance, making them less giant-like over time. In their records, the Anunnaki acknowledged that those who stayed on Earth, Enki, Enlil, Ninmah, aged more rapidly than those who remained on Nibiru, and that those born on Earth aged even faster. Now, genetic advancements allow us to know that the switch in parenthood from the male fecund seed to the female goddess's divine womb resulted in the demigods adopting the general DNA of the goddesses, but also her mitochondrial DNA as well. Throughout the saga of gods and demigods, the significance of these changes will become clear. As we see it in the Bible, the significant change between pre-diluvian and post-diluvian demigod times can be summed up as follows. Before, the sons of the gods chose whomever they wanted from among the daughters of mankind. Now, the daughters of the gods choose whomever they wanted from the sins of mankind. Through Sita's 6 words, Sita encapsulated the goddess's role in all of that. In cases when the mother was the deity, referring to her as the husband of the male no longer held true, the companion of the goddess was the male father. Gilgamesh was brought into the goddess era when Inanna said, "Come, be my lover." After the death of Gilgamesh, Uruk's heroic age ended with Enmerkar, Lugalbanda, and Gilgamesh. Utu, his son, took Uruk's place. The combined reign of Kalama and the 5 kings following him was 95 years. According to King List, only Meshe was accorded an extra word because he was a smith. All in all, King List notes that 12 kings ruled in Uruk for 2,310 years. Its kingship passed to Ur. It is recalled for their progress and stability, but not necessarily for their peaceful eras, that the dynasties of what is now called Kish and Uruk I ruled. The expansion of cities into city-states led to armed conflicts over boundaries, arable land, and water resources on the national level. The end of Dumuzi affected Inanna the most emotionally, so much so that it even led to her death. Due to Dumuzi's death and Inanna's fierce war against Marduk, the hopes placed on the Inanna-Dumuzi union were dashed internationally. The story is told in the text called Inanna's Descent to the Netherworld, misleadingly titled Inanna's Descent to the Lower World by scholars. Inanna went to Ereshkigal's lower world domain after Dumuzi's death. Ereshkigal had suspicions about Inanna, who came uninvited and met Nergal, her sister's husband. Thus, Ereshkigal ordered Inanna to be seized, killed with death rays, and hung as a carcass as punishment. Enki was the only one who could help when Inanna's handmaiden, who remained in Uruk, raised the alarm. Having constructed 2 clay androids that could withstand the death rays, he activated one by giving it the food of life and the other by giving it the water of life. They sprinkled the water of life and the plant of life on Inanna's corpse, and she arose, when they found her lifeless body. According to scholars, Inanna went to the lower world to search for Dumuzi's body. However, she already knew where the body was, since she had ordered its mummification and preservation. In Divine Encounters, I suggested that she sought fulfillment from Nergal of a custom related to the Bible in which a brother, as Nergal was from Dumuzi, sleeps with the widow to have a son who will carry on the dead man's name. But Ereshkigal would not allow it. A notable change that resulted from this unhappy marriage with Dumuzi was the introduction by Inanna of the sacred marriage ritual. On the anniversary of the unhappy marriage with Dumuzi, she spent the night with a man of her choice, usually the king. Often, this man was found dead the following day. The transfer of significant capital to Ur may have been an attempt to gain respite by shifting responsibility to Nana Sin, Ninurta's younger brother and Inanna's father. It was a cult center for Enlil's son Nana, meaning the bright one, a reference to the moon, established post-diluvial. Sumer was destined to play a significant role in the affairs of men and gods. Its story crossed paths with Abraham's in the Bible, but that would not occur until Ur would serve as Sumer's capital for the third time. During what is known as the Ur I period, following Uruk I, Ur, according to King List, had 4 kings who reigned for 177 years. Mesanipada and Meskiagnana is the most distinguished of them. While Ur's most glorious and tragic period came later, in the Ur III period, the archaeological evidence shows that Ur's first nearly 2 centuries were a period of high culture and significant artistic and technological progress. In Sumer, no one knows whether the reign was cut short by mounting pressures at the borders or by internal problems. King List itself suggests some turbulent events had taken place, causing the record keepers to list 5 names, not 4, amend one of them, and confuse reign lengths. However troubling the events were, the record shows that the national capital was abruptly moved from Ur to a small town called Awan, then to Hamasi and Adar, then to Kish, Uruk and Ur, shifted to Mari and Achshai, and then back again to Kish in approximately 2 centuries. A strong man named Lugal-Zagezi was then appointed as Uruk's king by the gods for the 3rd time. Inanna's aunt Nisaba was his mother, so presumably this should have been sufficient to ensure his blessing. He used his own troops to remove troublesome rulers as part of his effort to restore order among the quarreling and warring city-states. Lugal-Zagezi punished Umma for serving as a cult center for Inanna's son, Shara. Therefore, Lugal-Zagezi was gone soon after that, and the next king of kings was a man of Inanna's own choosing, a man who answered her call, "Come, be my lover." Having been in charge for millennia, a goddess now held. No matter what you call him, he's a hero. 2 of Ur's names are significant because they share a prefix of mes with Uruk's. Mesbe, he, equals fullness, plenty, as well as that of Kish, Mes Alim. Alim equals ram, claimed to have been Ninhursag's beloved son. Did the prefix mes, or the suffix mesh, as in Gilgamesh, designate the person as a demigod? In fact, the Sumerian term mes meant hero, in the same way the Hebrew term Gibor defined the demigods in Genesis 6. This conclusion is supported by BM 56488, an Akkadian text concerning a specific temple that contains the following statement. Misanipada ipushu gi bitcha. Misanipada built a temple. Nana akit ziri u talpit. It was Nana, the seed-giver, who destroyed the world. By referring to Nana, Sin, as the seed-giver, Mesanipada is simultaneously assigned the determinative divine and indicating what god created this demigod. We must also wonder, in light of other similarities between the Sumerian Mes and the Egyptian Mesis, as in Thothmes or Ramses, meaning issue of in pharaonic claims of divine parentage, whether the Sumerian Mes and Egyptian Mesis do not derive from the same early source. We believe the conclusion that Sumerian royal names beginning or ending with mes indicate demigod status will serve as a clue to unlocking various enigmas. 14. Empires of glory, winds of doom. Some day, my queen, Inanna crosses heaven, crosses earth. Having crossed heaven and earth, having crossed Elam and Shubhur, upon crossing, weary, he fell asleep as he approached. She was standing in my garden. She kissed me, and we mated. A gardener, later known as Shahrukhin, Sargon in English, described his chance encounter with Inanna in this way. Due to the exhaustion of the goddess from flying about, one cannot say that love was at first sight, but from what followed, it is evident that Inanna liked the man and his lovemaking. Sargon wrote in his autobiography that Ishtar granted him her love while he was a gardener, and for 54 years he ruled and governed the black-headed people. Anunnaki leadership is never clear how Inanna persuaded them to trust Sumer and its people. The black-headed ones, known by their nickname Sar-ge-ga, to the man whose kiss changed history. His name was Shahrukhin, truthful ruler. In the Semitic tongue of the Amuro, the westerners of the Semitic-speaking area northwest of Sumer, his features are preserved in a bronze sculpture, figure 101, confirming his non-Sumerian background. Known by the Semitic name Akkad, he built a new capital city for himself in Agade, from which the language's name derives. As a result of the importance of this king, the Sumerian king list indicates that kingship to Agade was carried by Lugal-Zagesi and mentions that Shahrukhin, a date grower and cupbearer of Ur-Zababa, built Agade and reigned there for 56 years. In ancient Mesopotamia, Egypt, and elsewhere, cupbearers held high ranks and great trust. It will be remembered even on Nibiru, where Anu served as Alalu's cupbearer. Scholars believe that some of the earliest Sumerian depictions referred to as libation scenes depict naked kings serving the gods as cupbearers. Apparently, Sargon was a royal prince in Kish under Ur-Zababa, the king of Kish. Sargon himself chose to keep his origin a mystery in the Legend of Sargon, the autobiographical text in which he wrote his autobiography. Agade's mighty king Sargon I am. I did not know who my father was. My mother was a high priestess. As a high priestess, my mother conceived me in secret. As in the story of Moses' birth 1,000 years later in Egypt, Sargon continued, the basket of rushes was sealed with bitumen, and she placed me in it. I did not sink when she threw me into the river. Aki, the gardener, bore me, carried me to the river. As Aki, the irrigator, drew water, he lifted me up. He made me and reared me as his son. Aki, the irrigator, as his gardener, Aki, the irrigator, appointed me. In time, the position of high priestess for the god Nana Sin in Ur, seen as one of great honor to Sargon's own daughter, Enheduanna, might explain Sargon's odd avoidance of claiming princehood. By claiming the same status as his mother, Sargon implied that his unknown father might be a god, thus making him a demigod. Considering the pressures on Sumer by migrants from the west and northwest, Sargon's Amorite heritage might have been regarded as a factor. Accordingly, establishing a new neutral national capital named Union also meant incorporating territories called Akkad north of olden Sumer, so that a new entity was called Sumer and Akkad. Henceforth, Inanna became known as the Akkadian name Ishtar. A few centuries later, Sargon set out from that capital to establish law and order, starting with the defeat of Lugal-Zagesi, who, the reader will recall, assaulted the city of Ishtar's son, the god Shara. The king turned his prowess against neighboring lands as he conquered old cities after old towns. In the era of Ishtar, Shahrukhin, king of Agade, became the ultimate ruler. He ruled over all the countries in his territory and crossed the sea in the east. He conquered the west in its entirety. From the upper sea, the Mediterranean, to the lower sea, the Sea of the East, the entire first region was firmly ruled by a national capital for the first time since its formation millennia previously. Sargon's empire was the first historically known empire to extend to the Mediterranean coast in the west, as well as the Persian Gulf. While Sargon acknowledged, when necessary, the authority of Enlil, Ninurta, Adad, and Nanna, he did so through the Khabur River in Asia Minor in the north. The conquests of Utu were carefully accomplished by order of my mistress, the divine Ishtar. It was in fact the era of Ishtar, as the inscriptions claim. It was a grand sight to see Agade as the imperial capital. In those days, a Sumerian text stated, Agade was rich in precious metals, copper, lead, and lapis lazuli slabs. Its granaries bulged at the sides, its old men were endowed with wisdom, its old women with eloquence, its young men with weapons, and its children with joyful hearts. An impressive new temple in Agade clarified which goddess ruled all of this. In Agade, holy Inanna erected a temple as her abode. In the glittering temple, her throne. Her shrines had to be built throughout Sumerian cities, outshining even the sacred Eanna in Uruk. That was a mistake. Growing arrogant and overbearing, Sargon made grave errors, including sending troops into cities beholden to Ninurta and Adad. His next act was to desecrate Babylon. Near olden Sumer, in the territory designated Akkad, lay Babylon, the very spot where Marduk attempted to build his own launch tower, the Tower of Babel incident. He made another Babylai near Agade after removing soil from the foundations of Babylon. To understand this unauthorized activity, it is essential to remember that Babylai, as Babylon was known in Akkadian, meant gateway of the gods, a sacred place, and that Marduk, upon learning that the site must remain undisturbed, was persuaded to give up. Moreover, Sargon took soil from Babylon's foundations to build another gateway of the gods adjoining the one at Agade. Marduk was enraged by the sacrilege, and the clash of clans was reignited. In addition to breaking the taboo regarding Babylon, Sargon also planned to create his own gateway of the gods at Agade, and this angered Enlil. As a result, Sargon's rapid removal and death did not end the era of Ishtar. Her son Rimush became king of Agade with the consent of Enlil, but he was replaced after 9 years by his brother Manishtushu, who ruled for 15 years. Inanna, Ishtar, had asked once again the son of Manishtushu, Naram-Sin. Whom Sin loves was Naram-Sin's theophoric name. He used the Akkadian name Sin rather than the Sumerian word Nanna. The king was able to build on the foundations laid by his grandfather with military expeditions and commerce, establishing trading posts for Sumerian merchants in distant places and creating trade routes on a global scale, which reached as far north as the Hittite domain of Nanna's brother, Ishkur. Naram-Sin's two-track policy could not quell the rise of cities, particularly in the west, supporting Marduk's renewed ambitions. With his wife Sarpanit and his earthborn son Nabu also marrying earthlings, named Tashmetum, Marduk gained support among the masses. The expectations for Marduk's ultimate victory reached messianic fervor in Egypt, where Marduk/Ra has been worshipped as the hidden Amin, Amon, and Egyptian pharaohs began to push northward, seizing control of the Mediterranean. Inanna, Ishtar, thus guided and blessed Naram-Sin to launch against the sinning cities in the west, which was the most significant military expedition in history. Having captured what was later called Canaan, he continued south to Magan, ancient Egypt. His merciless approach and capture of rivals are commemorated by a stone plaque depicting a glowing Ishtar offering him a wreath of victory. Among his inscriptions is a statement that he personally captured the king of Magan. Naram Sin haughtily defined himself on a victory stiller astride a rocket ship in the heavens after crossing the forbidden fourth region with its spaceport. He hailed himself as a god. As a hero accustomed to high-handedness, he placed a restraining hand on the Ekur, Enlil's sacred precinct at Nippur. Enlil was not present, so he demanded Enlil endorse him as king of the four regions. Enlil describes his reaction to these unprecedented acts of disobedience and sacrilege in a text known as the Curse of Agade. He called all the gods, including Enki, to summon the Anunnaki leadership to an assembly, but Inanna didn't show up. As she remained defiant inside the venerated temple of Eanna in Uruk, she demanded that the gods declare her as the supreme female deity. A woman has seized the heavenly kingship, the ancient text noted in amazement. Inanna has altered the rules of holy Anu. The gods decided in their assembly to wipe out Agade and all that goes along with it. Gutium, a land across the Zagros Mountains, was occupied by Ninurta's troops who systematically destroyed Agade. No one is even sure where Agade was. Indeed, the gods decreed that its remains will never be found. In the wake of the city's demise, Naram Sin too disappeared from the records. Nana Sin brought Lenana, Ishtar, back to Uruk from Uruk. She told Nana that she had had enough, so she would live in Ur with her mother's family. The era of Ishtar ended in 2255 BC. Her empire and the challenges to ancient authority left their mark on the ancient Near East for generations to come. The kingship of Sumer and Akkad did not exist for about a century. According to the Sumerian king list, who was king, who was not king, was a way of describing the situation. Ninurta governed the country de facto from his cult center in Lagash, a city whose historical records, artifacts, and sculptures have provided essential information about Sumer, the Sumerians, and the Sumerian civilization. The archaeological evidence from the Tello site reveals that dynastic rule began in Lagash with a ruler named Lugar. Shu-Engur dynastic rule was established in Lagash in about 3000 BC by King Lugal-Shu-Engur. This dynasty was responsible for the artificial insemination of Eannatum. More than a half-millennium of uninterrupted dynastic rule in Lagash indicates a country's stability during turbulent times. The list of Lagash's kings includes 43 names. Lagash is an ancient language. Lagash's kings preferred to be called patesi, governors, instead of Lugar. Lugar left behind countless votive inscriptions and other pieces of evidence. The textual evidence indicates that they were enlightened kings who sought to shape their people's lives according to their gods' high moral and ethical standards. The most incredible honor a king could attain was given the epithet righteous shepherd by Ninurta. The code of laws of Urukinga, a king who reigned about 4,500 years ago, prohibited abuse of authority, raking away of a widow's donkey, and delaying wages of the daily workers. A king's personal duty was to construct canals for irrigation and transportation, and construct communal buildings. Some of the best Sumerian sculptures were created 2,000 years before classical Greece. Festivals involving everyone, such as the Festival of First Fruits, were introduced. Literacy was encouraged, as evidenced by some of the most perfect cuneiform scripts. Lagash was not a national capital, nor is it mentioned in the Sumerian king list. With the transfer of the seat of federal rule from Kish to Uruk in religious political terms, Ninurta established what were then the best trained troops in the land to protect his own redoubt outside the reach of Inanna's whims and ambitions. After the Inanna-Naram-Sin upheavals, Ninurta restored Enlilite authority and brought Sumer a century of respite. However, Asgard continued to put relentless pressure on Sumer and Akkad, which led to the fall of Sumer and Akkad into ruins. Around 2160 BC, Enlil commissioned Ninurta to build a unique temple in Lagash that proclaims Ninurta's supremacy. Ninurta, the next Enlil, had the rank of 50 just below Anu, and his temple would be called E Ninu, House, Temple of 50. A king named Gudea, the Anointed One, built a temple in the Girsu, the sacred precinct of Lagash, as detailed in the extensive inscriptions found in the excavated remains of Lagash. It all started with a dream that Gudea had, recorded on clay cylinders on display at the Louvre Museum in Paris. A man wearing the headdress of a god appeared to Gudea, bright and shining like heaven, and he ordered him to build him a temple. She pointed at a particular star while holding a tablet with a celestial map. Her head was shaped like a temple. Then another deity appeared with a tablet in one hand and building brick. The building brick was lying in a basket by his side, and the tablet with the design was lying on Gudea's lap. Completely confused by the experience, commemorated in one of Gudea's statues, Gudea went to the goddess Nina's cult center Sirara, the house of face-solving, and asked her to solve the dream and determine what the objects were. Nina said that the first god was Nin, first lord of the Girsu, alias Ninurta. He commands you to build a new temple. The goddess is Nisaba. Build the temple according to what the holy planet instructs you. The other god is Ningishzida. The brick he gave you will serve as a mold. The carrying basket means that you have been assigned the task of construction. The tablet with the design is the architectural design of the seven-stage temple. Its name, she said, shall be Eninu. It was a rare honor for Gudea to help build a brand new temple from foundations up, when most other kings just repaired existing ones. Having mobilized the entire population for the project, he made it. He learned that the architectural requirements were far from straightforward. There was to be a domed observatory at the top for determining star and planet positions after nightfall, and there were also 2 stone circles in the forecourt for determining constellations on equinox day. Additionally, 2 sunken enclosures were required, one for Ninurta's aircraft, the divine blackbird, and the other for his awesome weapon. Gudea writes in his clearly written inscriptions in perfect Sumerian script that he had to go to the gods repeatedly and that he could not sleep until the task was completed. At one point, he was ready to give up, but in a command vision, he was instructed to begin building the engine. A cylinder known as Gudea Cylinder A records the preliminary events and details of the complex construction. Cycle B is devoted to elaborate rites tied to the temple, inauguration, specifically on New Year's Day, and the ceremonies surrounding Ningirsu and Bao's arrival at the Girsu and their entry into their new temple. The book closes with a recorded blessing of Gudea by Bao in appreciation of his construction efforts. As his reward, without explaining how it was granted, was Namti Muna Sud, his lifetime sustained, prolonged. Cylinder A introduces himself. In Cylinder A, Gudea repeatedly called Nina his mother, a daughter of Enlil and Ninlil, and a half-sister of Ninurta. Additionally, Bao twice referred to him as son of Nina in the blessing at the end of Cylinder B. These texts also provide some insight into his birth. In a sacred place he spoke to Nina. "Thou didst bring me forth from the seed implanted in thy womb by the goddess Bao," he said. He was a child brought forth by Bao. Gudea claimed to be a demigod born of the Enlil-Ninurta clan through Bao and Nina. Eninu's challenge to Marduk was compounded by the role of Egypt's Ningishzida and Nisaba, Thoth as the deity and Sesheta as the goddess. It was especially significant that Ningishzida, Thoth, actively participated in the project since he was the son of Enki, Ptah, and the half-brother of Marduk, Ra. Interestingly, his other half-brother, Nergal, who was married to Enlil's granddaughter in Ereshkigal, also often sided with the Enlilites. Marduk and Nabu gained adherents and conquered territory despite all that. Ninurta, the presumed heir of Enlil and Anu, had ties to Nibiru, but Marduk and Nabu belonged to Earth. This posed a growing problem for the Enlilites. After announcing the Ninurta strategy, the Enlilites switched to the Sin tactic, transferring the seat of national power from Ninurta to Nanna, whose Akkadian name was Sin, unlike Ninurta. The city of Ur, situated between Eridu to the south and Uruk to the north along the Euphrates River, was by then Sumer's prosperous commercial and manufacturing hub. Its very name, meaning urban domesticated place, came to mean not just city, but the city, and meant prosperity and health. Sumerian people loved the gods Nanna Sin and Ningal, Nikal in Akkadian. However, they did not participate in the gods' war. People everywhere, even in the rebel lands, were meant to perceive his leadership as the beginning of an era of peace and prosperity. In Ur, a ziggurat served as the deity's abode, rising in stages inside a walled sacred precinct. Served as a residence for priests, officials, and servants, within the walled section of the temple was the Gipar, nighttime abode, which contained the Gigunu, the chamber of nighttime pleasures for the gods. Despite being monogamous and having only one spouse, Ningal, Nanna Sin was able and did to enjoy concubines, through whom he had children in the Gipar. Behind those walls lay a magnificent city with 2 excellent harbors and a network of canals connecting it to the Euphrates, a thriving city with a king's palace, administrative buildings, lofty gates, avenues for promenading, a marketplace, multi-level private dwellings, many 2 stories high, schools, workshops, merchants' warehouses, and animal stalls. More than 4,000 years after it was built, the ziggurat and its monumental stairways dominate the landscape. In more detail in The Wars of Gods and Men, we tell how Abraham's story intertwined with events and the fate of Sumer in Ur, the Ur of the Chaldees, in which the biblical story of Abraham the Hebrew began as the starting point of his migration to Haran and then to Canaan. Abraham was born in Nippur but grew up in Ur, where his father was a Tirbu, an Oman priest skilled in astronomy. Kingship was restarted in and from Sumer with the careful choice of a new king. In Enlil's selection and Anu's approval, the new king, Ur-Nammu, the joy of Ur, was a demigod, not a mere mortal. He was a son of Ninsun, the mother of Gilgamesh, born in Uruk, a birth approved and witnessed by Anu, Enlil, and Nanna. It is reasonable to presume that this divine genealogy, including the claim that Ninhursag raised him, was part of Ur-Nammu's reign in the presence of Nanna and other gods. As a result, Ur-Nammu held the same status as Gilgamesh, whose exploits were well remembered and whose name was revered. Thus, it was a signal to friends and foes alike that the glory days under Enlil and his clan were back. Inscriptions, monuments, and archaeological findings attest to Ur-Nammu's reign's extensive public works, restoration of river navigation, and repair of the country's highways. Schools and arts and crafts grew, and social and economic conditions improved. In addition, the priesthood of Nippur and Ur were combined for the first time in Sumerian history, resulting in a revival of religion. By our calculations, it was at that time that Terah, Abraham's father, was transferred from Nippur to Ur. Despite agreements with neighboring rulers to the east and northeast, the enmity stirred up by Marduk and Nabu to the west spread prosperity and well-being. In 2096 BC, Ur-Nammu launched a military campaign against the rebel lands and sinning cities bordering the Mediterranean Sea in response to the situation. Although he was a great builder and economic shepherd, he did not succeed as a military leader. In the middle of battle, Ur-Nammu fell off his chariot and was crushed like a jug. The tragedy was compounded when the boat returning Ur-Nammu's body to Sumer was sunk. The waves sank it down with him aboard it. Upon hearing the devastating news of Ur-Nammu's defeat and tragic death, a great lament resounded throughout Ur. People couldn't understand how such a righteous shepherd and God-fearing king could be a demigod. It was an ingenious death. Why did the Lord Nana not hold him? They asked. Why did Inanna, Lady of Heaven, not surround him with her regal arms? Why did the valiant Utu not assist him? There was only one possible explanation, the people of Ur and Sumer concluded. Enlil deceitfully changed his decree. These great gods went back on their word, and faith in them was deeply shaken. It is likely not by accident that the shocking death of Ur-Nammu in 2096 BC led the father of Abraham to relocate his family to Haran, the Karavanri, the central city that was Sumer's link to the land of the Hittites. Haran was surrounded by fertile meadows that could be used for shepherding, as it was located at the headwaters of the Euphrates River and at a crossroads of international trade and military routes. Merchants from Ur settled there and brought wool, skins, and leather from the region, metals and rare stones, and their renowned woolen garments and carpets from Ur. Besides the second largest temple to Nana Sin after Ur, the city was often called the Second Ur, Sumer's most tragic era, for before the century was out, Sumer was gone. The ascension of Ur-Nammu to Ur's throne in 2113 BC marked the beginning of Ur-3. The Sumerian culture peaked during this period when monotheism, the belief in one creator god, had its roots. After Ur-Nammu died, his son Shulgi inherited the throne of Ur. His inscriptions assert that he was born under the auspices of the gods, as was his father, who claimed the status of a demigod. Through a union between Ur-Nammu and Enlil's high priestess, Nana arranged for the child to be conceived in Enlil's temple in Nippur. A little Enlil, a kingly child, shall be conceived. He acquired the habit of calling Ningal, Nana's spouse, Ningale, my mother, and my brother were Utu Shamash, their son. Then he asserted in self-laudatory terms that he was a son of Ninsun, but in another melody he claimed to be only her adopted son. He claimed to be a demigod in various and contradictory versions, which cast doubt on his claim. Immediately following his accession to the throne, Shulgi launched an expedition to the outlying provinces and the rebel territories, but his weapons were offers of trade, peace, and his daughters. By avoiding the fourth region, he reached the two destinations of the still-revered Gilgamesh, the Sinai Peninsula, where the spaceport was, in the south, and the landing place in the north. As he traveled, he stopped to worship at the Place of Bright Oracles, also called Jerusalem. Once he venerated the three space sites, he followed the Fertile Crescent, the east-west trade routes determined by geography and water sources, returning to Sumer. Upon returning to Ur, Shulgi was given High Priest of Anu, Priest of Nana. Utu Shamash befriended him, and then Inanna, Ishtar, gave him personal attention, whose abode had been in Ur since the demise of Naram Sin. As a result of Shulgi's peace offensive, he turned from state affairs to become Inanna's lover after a while. He boasted that Inanna had given him her vulva in her temple in numerous love songs that have been found in the ruins of Ur. However, unrest grew again in the rebel lands as Shulgi neglected state affairs in favor of personal pleasure. As a result of his unpreparedness for war, Shulgi relied on Elamite troops to fight and build a fortified wall to protect Sumer against foreign invasions. Scholars believe it ran from where Baghdad is today, north of the Euphrates River to the Tigris River, and was therefore known as the Great West Wall. Due to that, Sumer's heartland was cut off from the northern provinces. 2,400 years ago, the gods, led by Enlil, decreed for Shulgi the death of a sinner. Significantly, it was then that Abraham left Haran for Canaan. Marduk also arrived in Haran during that same year, 2048 BC, and made it his headquarters for the next 24 years. According to a well-preserved clay tablet, his arrival represented a direct challenge to Enlilite hegemony. Along with its military significance, the move cut Sumer off from its economically vital commercial relationships. As a result, Sumer had shrunk. The chess move of Marduk's establishment of a command post at Haran enabled Nabu to marshal his cities, heading toward the Great Sea and setting his course. Among them were the all-important landing place in Lebanon and the mission control city of Shalim, alias Jerusalem. Then Marduk announced that the spaceport region was no longer neutral. It was to be considered a Marduk and Nabu domain. He now controlled all the space-related facilities in Egypt, his original dominion. Obviously, such a situation would not be acceptable to the Enlilites. As Shulgi's successor, Amar-Sin embarked on a military expedition after an army tour, culminating in an ambitious campaign to punish the rebel lands of the West, the biblical Canaan. The 7th year of his reign was when Amar-Sin led an alliance against the Sin cities in the West, including Sodom and Gomorrah, in an attempt to regain control of the spaceport. In my book, The Wars of Gods and Men, he was the Amraphel of Genesis 14. The Bible describes the clash as a war between the East and West. Abraham participated in the first great international war of antiquity. Commanding a cavalry of camel riders called Ishnar, a literal Hebrew and Sumerian rendering of lunar, cavalrymen prevented the invaders from reaching the spaceport. He then pursued the retreating invaders to Damascus, nowadays Syria, to reclaim his nephew Lot, who was captured in Sodom. The gods' war was clearly evolving into a far-flung conflict involving many nations. Mar-Sin was killed by a scorpion bite rather than an enemy lance in 2039 BC. Following his death, his brother Shu-Sin took over. His reign records 2 military expeditions northward, but none westward, mainly defensive measures. He primarily built new sections of the Wall of the West. However, the defenses were continually moved closer and closer to Sumer's heartland, and the territory controlled by Ur diminished. Upon Ibi-Sin's accession to the throne in 2029 BCE, invaders from the west had broken through Ur's defensive wall and fought Elamite troops in the Sumerian territory. The Westerners were directed and prompted by Nabu. In Haran, his divine father Marduk waited for Babylon's recapture. Marduk added a new celestial argument to his old reasons for seeking supremacy, beginning with his father Enki being stripped of his succession rights. He said that Enlil's zodiacal age of the bull, Taurus, was ending, and his era, the age of the ram, Aries, was beginning. The irony is that his own brothers pointed out that, according to astronomical observations, the zodiacal constellation of the ram had not yet started. Ningishzida said as much. Nergal from the station in Lagash and Nergal from the observatory. There are no lower worlds. The brothers' discovery only enraged Marduk. Nabu intensified his recruiting of Marduk fighters. Enlil's frustration and desperation grew. He convened the great gods for an emergency assembly. The assembly approved extraordinary steps that altered the future forever. various written records from antiquity are still available, providing us not just with an overview of events, but with detailed information about battles, strategies, conversations, arguments, participants and their moves, and the critical decisions that led to the most significant worldwide upheaval since the deluge. As well as the date formulas and diverse other references, the principal sources for reconstructing these dramatic events are the relevant chapters in Genesis, Marduk's statements in the Marduk prophecy, the Kedorla Omer texts, a collection of tablets in the British Museum. The Era Epos is a long autobiographical document dictated by Nergal to a trusted scribe. It is similar to a movie, usually a crime thriller, where particular eyewitnesses and principals describe the same event differently, but from which the true story emerges. So are we able to reconstruct the actual facts in this case? Those sources tell us that Marduk did not personally attend the emergency council summoned by Enlil, but instead sent them an appeal in which he repeatedly asked, "Until when?" 24 years had passed since he had been in Haran, and he wondered, until when? When would my days of wandering end? The year 2024 BC marked the 72nd anniversary of his life on the run. 1 degree of the zodiacal circle has passed since then. Having been called to present the Enlilite case, Ninurta accused Marduk's followers of defiling Enlil's temple in Nippur, even accusing them of attacking it. Anar, Sin, primarily blamed Nabu. Nabu was summoned by the gods, and his father's son came. He pointed the finger at Ninurta. He denounced Nergal, who was present, and he showed disrespect to Enlil evil, accusing the Lord of the Command of injustice and condoning destruction. What are Marduk and Nabu actually charged with? Enki inquired. Exceedingly enraged was Nergal. Why do you keep fighting? He asked him. Enki shouted at Nergal to leave him alone after arguing so much with him. Then Enki consulted himself and concocted the idea of resorting to the awesome treason after being vilified by Marduk and Nabu. In a secret underground location somewhere in Africa, in his brother Gibil's domain, he did not know where they were hidden, but he knew they existed on Earth. With today's technology, they are equivalent to 7 nuclear devices. Clad with terror, with a brilliance they advance. They were accidentally brought to Earth by Alalu fleeing Nibiru and were hidden in a secret place long ago. Enki knew where, as did Enlil. The gods, overruling Enki, met as a war council to decide to punish Marduk. The gods made it absolutely clear to Nergal and Ninurta that the mission was limited and conditional. The ancient records state that Anu, lord of the gods, on earth had pity. Anu to earth, the words he spoke. Earth to Anu, the words he spoke. He made it clear that his approval for the unprecedented step of using awesome weapons was limited to depriving Marduk of the Sinai spaceport, but that neither gods nor people should be harmed. Anu, lord of the gods, on earth had pity. The epic Ishum begins in 2024 BC. The 2 kings Ninurta, called the Scorcher in Ishum, and Nergal, called the Annihilator in Era, unleashed nuclear weapons which destroyed the spaceport and adjacent sinning cities near the Dead Sea. As described by the Bible, Abraham, who was then encamped in the mountains overlooking the Dead Sea, was notified of what was to come by 3 malachim, translated as angels but literally meaning emissaries, earlier that day. Abraham's nephew Lot lived in Sodom, and Abraham's 2 other nephews followed him. The Era Epos tells us that Ishum, Ninurta, set out in his divine blackbird to mount the most supreme night. Arriving there, the mount was smashed when he raised his hand. By the mount most supreme plane, then he annihilated, not a single tree stem remained in its forests. By 2 pinpointed nuclear drops, Ninurta obliterated the spaceport first, Mount Most Supreme, also known as Mount Moshu in the Gilgamesh epic, and then the adjoining plain that served as a landing and takeoff area. An image taken from space shows the scarring in the Sinai Peninsula, where the plain amid white limestone mountains is still covered with crushed and deeply burned rocks. The destruction of the sinning cities was a complicated process. Nergal was dissuaded from carrying out the mission by Ninurta in Sumerian texts. According to the Bible, Abraham pleaded with one of the 3 angels who visited him to spare Sodom if 10 righteous ones could be found there. A mob seeking to sodomize 2 angels sent to Sodom to verify whether the city should be spared attacked them that evening. They agreed to delay the upheaval so Lot's family could escape to the mountains as soon as possible. A little before dawn, Erah, emulating Ishum, uprooted the cities, making them desolate. He wiped out Sodom, Gomorrah, and 3 other cities in the disobedient land. The Bible affirms that, as the sun rose over earth, from the skies those cities were upheaval with brimstones and fire that came from Yahweh. Abraham arose at dawn and went to where he had stood with the Lord. As he looked toward Sodom and Gomorrah, he looked in the direction of the plain, and lo, and beheld, like a furnace, steam arose from the ground. Genesis 19:27-28. The Bible says that happened when the annihilator Nergal dropped 5 nuclear devices, annihilating the cities of the plain. After the nuclear holocaust, the law of unintended consequences was demonstrated on a catastrophic scale. The death of Sumer itself was caused by a poisonous airborne nuclear cloud carried eastward by unexpected winds. Evil wind. A storm, the evil wind, tossed the skies, causing the cities to become desolate, causing houses to become desolate, causing sheepfolds to be emptied, causing Sumer's waters to be bitter, its cultivated fields to grow weeds. So every text from that time described what had happened. The texts claim that a catastrophe erupted on Sumerian soil, one unfathomable to man. In the streets an unseen death roamed, letting loose on the road. It cannot be seen when it enters the house. It glides like a snake through the door and blows in like a breeze through the hinge. The highest wall, the thickest wall, can't protect from this evil which terrorizes the world as a ghost. Flooding occurs. Behind doors, those who hide are killed. Those who fled to the rooftops perished there. It was a horrible, gruesome death. Whenever the evil wind reached, the terrified people could not breathe, or their mouths were drenched in blood. Evil wind made the faces pale as the heads writhed in blood. Anu decreed the great storm. From Enlil's heart it came. It was triggered by nuclear devices. From 7 weapons it came in a lightning flash. It came from the plain of the Dead Sea. From the plain of no pity it had come. The gods fled Sumer in panic after learning the evil wind's direction. Various lamentation texts, such as Lamentation over the destruction of Sumer and Ur, list the cities and temples abandoned to the wind, and describe the haste, terror, and grief that each deity felt when they fled, unable to help the people. I was forced to run from my temple like a bird, Inanna lamented. Behind them were standing temples, houses, animal stalls, and all other buildings, but everything that lived, be people, animals, or vegetation, was dead. The day when the skies were crushed and the earth was smitten, its face obliterated by the maelstrom. Such were the words written even centuries after the event. An emotional Ningal wrote in a lamentation over the destruction of Ur, Ur and its people were given over to the wind.